All right, Fairly all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, on to the next agenda item, which is okay. Well, you all saw we had 12 pages of comments, and that was not even everyone commenting. So I hope you're all ready to roll up your sleeves and dig in. Had some conversation about this with Ginger, and I thought through, the process so that it's fair and equitable for people to say, what they want to say, and at the same time, be respectful of our time constraints. So I think depending on the nature of the comment, we may have a different format. I personally feel we really need to have dialogue. When the county council purposely put together people with opposite viewpoints, it was so we could generate consensus and be able to come back to them and say confidently, we as a group agree to this. So where we can, try to keep that in mind, consensus building in this community amongst this group would be really powerful. So Ginger, you want to say some comments?
A couple of things just organizationally, and we're all making this up as we go. So if we're doing something and it doesn't work for everybody, just throw it out there. We'll come up with a different way to do it. But so I did send around the compiled list of everyone's comments. I did print a few of them if somebody needs them, you didn't bring them or whatever. What I thought would work the best is everybody has their printed version of the comments. And as we go through what I have on the screen, which is what you were commenting on, right? I have highlighted in yellow anything that received a comment. So as we go through the ordinance, we'll follow along with the comments and have the discussion sort of in that way. Does that seem to make sense?
Yes.
Does anybody want one of these printed versions? I'll send them on. I didn't print 15, but we can make more if we need them.
Can we make that just a little bit larger than the Word doc?
Yes.
For those of us who have impairments.
I have a bit. While we're setting up, Melissa, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah. First of all, Happy New Year to everybody. Second, just to echo Carrie, I think it's very healthy that there is obvious going through the comments that there are very different areas of expertise and opinions that came to light, and I think that's super healthy and good, and I believe everyone's here in good faith, so I'm really looking forward to robust discussion. The third thing is we talked about trying to do goal setting for all of our work. I am wondering if we should just have sort of an overarching statement for each ordinance area. For instance, several people made the comment, I think we all want to save as many trees as we can. I don't make that assumption necessarily about everyone else. And so I don't know if, I'm putting it out there, if there's, or if we just jump right into engaging on these topics. And then the last thing is that Bob circulated this morning an article from the Atlantic, and it was really focusing on market pressures of development and housing stock. But within that was something that I hope we can think about and talk about. We have relationships to trees on this committee in two ways. Bear with me. One is our natural relationship to trees. Trees provide ecological services to us, and that's listed at the beginning of the ordinance, and I'd actually like to see that expanded some personally. Then we also have the relationship of trees to development, which is the meat of what we're talking about. And one of the things that came up in the Atlantic article, and which some of us, before we became part of this committee, had held conversations about, is looking at development in a different way. And one of the things that we could think about is clustering density so we can cluster the trees. And that also came up in a lot of places in the ordinance. If we're, it's kind of old school now to think about developments, each house on its own little acre, nice little checkerboard. development. So if we really want to amp up that, and it's beyond the tree ordinance, it goes into how we develop. But I think that that might be something to bear in mind as we go forward, because not everyone is on board with this idea of clustering density, or understanding that there's a positive payoff if like me, we want trees to be kept. So thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. First off, I'm an environmentalist at heart. I'm a developer and builder for the last 50 years, but, I'm an environmentalist at heart, and, I was looking at the article that Alice sent around about preserving, over forests. I didn't see that. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. And it led me down the path that I'm going to share, and that is that, our focus has been preserving trees everywhere. And it seems to me that our focus should really be preserving trees in areas where we really have diverse ecosystems. And what we might think about is, instead of preserving trees when we're building communities, planting lots and lots of trees. I mean, we all love this town we live in, and it has gotten all kinds of awards for its trees. I hope everybody understands that darn near every tree in the land was planted. They weren't saved. You don't do streetscapes like we have by saving trees when you develop. You develop and then you replant. And, then I started thinking that thing through, and where I ended up with was, as a developer now, speaking purely as a developer, I would be tickled to death if I paid a flat fee and I could go in, do what I needed to do to develop a piece of property, meet minimum standards with a number of trees per lot, whatever the sizes are, and we determine those minimum standards are, either with what was there or by planting nice stuff, and then paying in to a fund, a flat fee. And I played with the numbers, and if I were to pay $1,000, or if we were to collect $1,000 in 2022 from every platted lot or permit that went through, there were 6,000 of them. My math's right, that's $6 million that can go towards purchasing alongside of Volusia Forever. All right, Volusia Forever on a tax basis only collected $4 million last year. And I can tell you on the community I'm doing right now that I have more than that per lot in just tree surveys. So I'm kind of thinking, and I haven't really processed this whole idea, that we could meet all of our goals with something way simpler for the developer. I mean, incredibly simple for the developer. Something he knows he's got to deal with, and this is going to be it. And at the same time, get the kind of money we want to meet the goals of Volusia Forever. And when I was looking at the site, I think our goal is 200,000 more acres, and we've already acquired, I think somewhere around 50,000 acres in Volusia County. We can get that goal really quickly if there's money coming straight through into Volusia Forever to save diverse ecosystems. Because no matter what we save when I do a community, it's not going to be a diverse ecosystem. It's going to be something by design. And, anyway, that's kind of where I was going with it. It's a whole different thought process than what we're going through. But it would seem to me that something along those lines would accomplish our goals of preserving really valuable ecosystems, while at the same time allowing development to take place without, incredibly complicated, as we can see by all the comments, ordinances and processes to go through, but rather a really simple, hey, here's the minimum standard, you're going to do this, boom.
Well, here's a thought, Bob, and I do appreciate, philosophically, we're coming from different places, and so I'm glad, that we're vocalizing it. I think it would be interesting, you got some of the data, what the other side of it is how much revenue is being generated through the tree fund anyways. is it outweighing it? So I would be interested to get that data, present it back to this group, Bob, so maybe that's something we can follow up with Ginger. But that kind of thinking, I think, is, we're all open to. Innovative ways, we don't have to be in a box, you know, if there are better ways to accomplish the same goal, that's the consensus we're looking for, so. All right, any other comments, Bill?
Yeah, so as I'm thinking through all this, I'm realizing that we're looking at the tree preservation ordinance kind of myopically, and we really need to also look at how it relates to our growth management and zoning and everything. It's kind of like we're looking at, you know, the whole body is all of our regulations and how we develop, and this is, you know, ear, nose, and throat, or something very specific, but it does relate to the other parts of it. And so we need to also think about possibly, instead of mandating tree preservation, incentivizing it and saying that, okay, if you want more than 15% tree preservation, you can do it, but you get more density so that you can cluster. And Wendy was right on a couple times ago, we need density if we're going to be successful in our urban growth areas, so we can have pedestrian friendly, walkability, mass transit, and everything. So we need to be conscious that this is just one little tiny piece of it, and there's other parts.
All right, yeah, we'll keep that top of mind. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I don't know if this is working or not. There we go. When I read through the ordinances and the changes and everything, I really didn't have a lot of specific comments because I think some of the comments were intact and in the right place. But what struck me really interestingly was that a lot of authority and power goes into the hands of the county forester in this ordinance. And it just, as we broaden this to encompass more development, how big is the county forester's office, number one, is my question. Does this create another level of bureaucracy and another level of where the county has to fund more staff for the county forester? And can they, because I look at it and think, my gosh, the county forester is going to be from one end of this county to the other, 24/7, and still probably not catch up to the workload when you put this kind of ordinances in place. Just a question and just a thought.
Oh, go ahead, Ginger.
Yeah, so here's the county forester.
Right.
He, and so I'll just say this, pretty much everything that you read is existing language, right? We've tweaked some things along the way. The structure and underline are tweaks more than policy changes. Anything that was a policy change kind of got called out with one of those notes, like, hey, do we want to do this? So what you see is kind of how we do it right now. And there's a staff of 6 full-time inspectors, and then Keith and one other person does most of the commercial, like site plan and subdivision review. And they visit every development site in this county.
Okay, so then just for clarity then, they do the research for you and then you put your John Hancock on whether you approve this or not. And that's, they do the legwork for you. No.
They're designees of the county forester. They're trained by me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm their supervisor. I train them, review their stuff, and that's how I do it. Another thing about the county forester, and there's probably too much power, my decisions are appealable to the development review committee. So if someone isn't agreed by my decision, it's not like they can't appeal that decision and have another revenue.
Thank you. And then one more comment behind you.
Oh.
Hi, Clay. Just want to also let you know that, as we all know, you can't write the perfect rule. We cannot come into a written document that handles 100% of the situations. And that's why you'll see in our, as Bill was saying, throughout our codes and throughout our regulations, what we try and do is make sure the staff member who has knowledge, experience, and authority to be able to grant flexibility to a certain limited extent. And that's where the county forester comes into, in that those situations where the black and white is not cleanly fitting into it, Keith has to use his understanding of you know, first of all, being a certified arborist, all of the other information is understanding and knowledge of the code to be able to come up with a solution that's consistent with the purpose and intent of that ordinance. So that, again, is something that we use as another way of ensuring that our codes are in place and capturing the purpose and intent. And for those areas of gray, we have authorized staff who have the experience to be able to do so.
I did put a note, John, so we'll be mindful of that though as we go through this ordinance. How can we alleviate, you know, any of that extra burden, I guess, unnecessary burden? So Tyler?
So reading through what everybody sent, thank you to Bob, and thank you to Melissa and Alex as well. Apologies for these reading today. Right next to me too. So reading all of this stuff, I kept coming to a conclusion that we have natural environments and we have urban environments where we live, and a lot of times they don't really mix well. A lot of times when we try to keep the natural environment and the urban environment, the storm comes through and kills everything. And I think that's what I kept reading in the IFAS report that Melissa sent. And as I was taking my notes, one of the notes that I took, it kind of lines up with what you were saying, Bob. Could we have a conservation impact fee alternative? Could we have something where we fund land purchases for conservation elsewhere? When we look at the map of all the conservation land in the county, we have huge chunks of connected habitat and like really high value ecosystems that are interconnected upland wetland mix throughout the center of our county, along the southeastern edge, along the northeastern edge, and along the western edge. And so when I look at these corridors, that's where I would, personally, I'd rather see land saved there than in the backyard of the subdivision that's going in a half mile from my house, personally. Now, heat island, other things come into effect, and so this is where I think the answer to me, and again, agreeing with Bob, not to just be an echo chamber on the side, but we can replant very effectively something that's hardy, that will survive storms, that will provide the heat island relief, the carbon sequestration, the oxygen renourishment, everything else, the shade, the elements that we're looking for pretty effectively. It doesn't really matter what was there before. We know what we want as a finished product. And I think I said in the November meeting, you know, we have a 1 tree per 2,500 square foot lot area minimum standard. Applying that to my house, I have 36 trees. I have a lot of yard area that's clear, and I have 2 acres and I have 65 trees. So I have double that already, and I have a pretty good clear space in my yard and nothing that's like in imminent danger of being my house. So I do think that we could look at prescribed, developed, urbanized area code, ignore the need for, I mean, I'm reading what is proposed and how to have tighter tree surveys. Because this is something that the first tree survey I brought to Keith, he rejected, and there's been a hostility and that first interaction because I was blamed. Now, I'm not a surveyor, I'm an engineer, so somebody gives me a survey. I hadn't gone and walked the forest because it was a dense forest. Keith did, and he found that the survey had multiple very obvious errors. It was likely that the surveyor never set foot on the state. And so when I encounter that type of a situation, I as the engineer stuck in the middle. I don't know what to do. My client paid a surveyor to go do this. There's clearly an ethics issue that was at play on that one. But it puts Keith in a difficult position as well, because he's got to go chase all of this dishonesty down. And when we create enforcement as the mechanism to achieve the goals that we have, it makes it really hard to get there. Why not just say what we want? We want a tree for every 1,000 square feet of land area, and you either need to preserve 15% or you need to pay 1,000 or whatever it is per home or per acre to go conserve land elsewhere. Because what we're getting in conservation are these strips and these little spit-sized things.
I hope the committee's okay to allow a little bit of conversation and dialogue we've never really had before. But Ginger, are we permitted? I think this could be something worked offline, get a little more research, put a little more meat to the bones, and bring back those findings. Is that something we're permitted to do? Like, could we public notice a Zoom meeting and the public can listen in if they want to, and have a little subcommittee look at this, examine this?
Yeah, as long as it's noticed, right? As long as
Just
it's
a
positive.
Zoom meeting between a couple of people who would like to volunteer to look into, is
It
there
doesn't
really
have to be all of the members. Let's ask Chris.
Yeah.
Earn your keep today, Chris.
Yeah.
Good questions.
So if you wanted to have a small group examine this idea of a conservation impact fee or a flat fee and discuss it, the merits of it, could we just public notice the Zoom meeting and allow that small group to have the Zoom meeting and then bring back the findings to this group?
So we definitely have to have notice, we have to have minutes taken. I think it would be done, we should definitely, I'll discuss with you later if you don't want to.
Okay.
I'll give you some of the inquiries about whether we need to have a quorum of some sort, but, it's a movie for sure.
Okay, well, we'll have him research that, but I think that would be really ideal for this group because a lot of good ideas are coming out, but we really need more time and information, to address it. So we see you put your card down. Bob, did you still want to make a comment?
Yeah, 2 quick points. One is that Tyler and I had no conversation previous to this, all right, just for the record. And secondly, my idea, and I think that, Tyler would agree, that this would not be inclusive of historic trees. Something that this kind of minimum standard, you would still take your project and go, man, I got 3 250-year-old trees. I need to figure out how to design around these. So, I would still see that as part of
Sure.
this minimum standard, that there would still be a carve out for those really special trees.
Sure. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, how about we jump into the fun stuff? And we decided we're going to go comment by comment, Ginger. Or you want to go
Yeah,
line by
so I'll tell you kind of what Keith and I prepared, and we'll try it and see how it goes, right? So, like I said, I've got the ordinance up on the screen. I've highlighted the areas that there was a comment about. For as many comments as possible, we also researched if there is a diagram or a figure or some sort of supporting document that could help us understand it, right? So we've got examples of site plans and we've got examples of subdivision plans, and so as we read your comments, we tried to prepare things that would help you either understand what we were trying to say or answer your question in one way or another. So we'll try to, as we go through, pull up any of those supporting elements as possible. And just one other thing I wanted to say up front is that the ordinance that you have, we have found over the years that the order that things happen in the existing ordinance is kind of wonky. It doesn't read well, and it's confusing if you're the person trying to comply with the ordinance. And so we've moved sections around, or we've proposed to move sections around. So as we go through today, the ordinance that occurs on the paper isn't how we envision it to be. So I want to talk about it in the order that it would happen, because it makes a lot more sense, right? Like Melissa had made a comment about the standards for review being way down in the ordinance. Yes, we agree. We have proposed that to change. So we'll jump around just a little bit so that when we're talking about it in the order that we envision it should actually be, not the order that it is now.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so this is the very beginning of the ordinance, the section that talks about purpose and jurisdiction, and on our comment sheet, Melissa had made some comments about incorporating some other ideas, and so, Carrie, did you want?
She and Alex both proposed adding. Is there anyone who's opposed? Is there any reason not to add? I mean, would there be any danger to adding more examples of how trees are beneficial? Does anyone see any downside to that? Aside from, Bill, you made a comment about, and I will ask you, Bill, are you just like dead set, you want this incorporated in there, or you just were making you're just saying that?
What?
Your comment, they only increase the economic value of low density development. You're not asking for
That's just a
strict,
comment.
okay.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Alex and Melissa. So Sarah Lee, go ahead.
To answer your question, I'm supportive of adding the language, specifically Melissa and Alex both had some suggestions. However, I do not agree that trees contribute to reductions in crime. I would not be okay with that being added. It actually, the ordinance as it is today conflicts with some subset requirements, and often, as the former representative for the school district, put us between two noble causes. So I would prefer not to see that one about crime. However, I was supportive of adding language.
Okay, Melissa, are you up to that? Do you want to debate that, or you're comfortable?
I'm comfortable with that not being there. I didn't pull that out of thin air though. There are a lot of studies that show in an urban setting it is helpful, but if it creates additional impediments, then I'm okay with not having that one.
All right, so we will disregard that. Otherwise, are people comfortable? Tyler, do you want to make a comment?
I think my question would be, are we creating statements of fact that the county can have to defend in the future? Is there a liability that gets created? And if there is, I'm not opposed to what's being stated.
That's a good question, yeah.
But is there a benefit to being there? Because it's not actually the rule. It seems to almost be the lobbying for why the rule is there, which to me is not what a statute or a rule or other things should be.
Sure, can we have staff weigh in on?
Yeah.
Is this create liabilities if you start making statements?
Well, I suppose it depends on what the statements are. Usually things like the purpose is used to lay out the background for why we're doing what we're doing. So a good foundation, so we're not doing anything that's considered arbitrary and capricious. But if we end up doing things that are contrary to our purpose, that can go against us. There can be potentials where that section could hinder us, but most likely not.
Okay. So the question becomes, Melissa and Alex, are you guys, you feel so strongly you want this inserted? Or when I read through it, it looked like they were being addressed, you're just sort of expounding on it. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I could have provided citations, first of all, for everything that I wrote, and I didn't because I thought this is up for discussion. I think that particularly it is important to talk about carbon sequestration because that's something that we know now. That may not have been documented when this was originally done. And the biodiversity component, there are many ways that trees produce valuable biodiversity, and we are in an insect crisis in the world. And trees are very important to the insect population, which is responsible for our food. I know that this kind of topic makes people's eyes cross if you start going into the food web, but that's also very well documented. So it seems to me if we are setting out at the beginning of this ordinance all the ways in which trees provide benefits to us as human beings and the world in which we live, we should update it. Whether it's adding points or just massaging the existing language to make it a little bit more specific.
Okay, well, I heard from Sarah. Did you want to say something? Yeah, I have other people with her. Okay, go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't take.
So this is just the preamble. Do all rules have preambles like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I agree, it's probably important to get the purpose, and then the rule supports the
So
purpose.
everyone sounds favorable so far, Jessica?
Yeah, I'm in favor. I was gonna say, I think that carbon dioxide is mentioned in there, we could probably expand that. And then if you tie together Alex's, with Melissa's, and talk about, one additional point on biodiversity, I mean, heat effects can be added where we reduce the percentage of impervious. I think very small changes would be in the intent.
Okay, then. If everyone's comfortable with that, Ginger?
So what I would suggest is, if we're all in agreement with everything except for the reduction in crime, is let us take a stab at writing it, and then, when we meet again, we'll have some specific language. The only thing I would ask is, on Alex's comments, I just want to be clear that, and maybe I'm certainly not trying to speak for you, but this, to me, like old growth and historic trees and forests are important, is a little different than it's okay to clear all of the urban areas because we're gonna save stuff somewhere else or we're gonna plant new trees. And to me, those are not necessarily consistent, and I think that is something that this group probably should discuss a little bit more, because if we're saying old trees or existing trees are valuable, then there is a question about whether we want to try to protect them, even in development sites, to the extent possible. So to me, there's a little inconsistency there that would.
Can we avoid that inconsistency? Alex, are you okay if we just avoid that and just touch on biodiversity?
I would like to see old growth and historic referenced in there specifically, because if we do clear cut all of our urban areas, we won't have old growth left.
Okay.
What is the definition of old growth? Is there a point?
Not that I'm aware of.
And it's Sterling.
But isn't the whole reason we have historic trees to protect old growth? And the reason we have rules for tree replacement and specific specifications is to ensure that there is always the benefits of trees, whether it's old or the need for replacement. I mean, I think there's a part of the ordinance, and maybe we need, maybe there needs a specific purpose statement to help identify why historic trees are part of the ordinance.
Is that
We
what
have
you're
historic
doing?
trees.
Is that your intent, Alex? Is that we need to explain why historic? So we won't use the word old growth. We'll just stick to historic trees. And then this is the explanation for why we're trying to preserve them.
I guess my reference to old growth is historic people attach that 36-inch to. And there are forests that don't meet that 36-inch requirement that have been around for eons. So I would like to have that distinction in language between old growth and historic.
Could we use maybe the term mature, like mature trees or something like that? I don't know that, I guess I'm not sure that in Volusia County we have what you would call old growth. But I think, I think what I took from what you said was,
Old growth.
I'm old growth. Well.
It's so common. North Peninsula State Park are old growth, but they're below the ground.
What I took from what Alex said, and maybe it's just me, is that existing trees are important. It's worth saving existing trees versus
Regardless of their
cutting stuff down
size.
and replanting.
Yeah.
That's what I took. If that's not what you meant, then, that's.
Well, you said yes, so
That is
that is the, okay, so if you write it in that manner, you'd be satisfied. Bill, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm not sure, when we were doing some greenhouse gas stuff back during, the session, I think the smaller trees actually sequester more than the big trees. As they grow, they sequester more. So I think we better check I'm not totally sure that's true, but.
All right, so Bill, if you could provide that data back to Ginger and Alex, whatever you have that, where you got that from. And that could also be a deciding point. If it shows that it is, we'll put it in. If not, we just will avoid that comment.
And just to add that conversation real quick. Oftentimes people will worry about the purpose and jurisdiction section getting a little bogged down with too much information. Another place to add very specific information is in the whereas sections of the ordinance itself that implements these changes. That's another great place that still gets the idea across and is used legislatively as well.
Thank you, yes. All right, so Ginger, do you feel comfortable? We can.
Yes, so what I took from that is the first 3 bullets from Melissa are good, and we're gonna do a little bit more research, but add something to the effect of existing trees are valuable for a number of reasons. And maybe that's here and in the whereas clause of the ordinance, or maybe it's just in the whereas, we can work that out.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
All right, moving on, page 2.
We're on page
37. This was a comment from Bob and Liz. So it seems to me staff can just draft that definition.
We have a definition. So here's what I'll tell you about that. So a definition of nuisance trees. There is a definition of nuisance trees. the reason you missed it was because we were proposing to change it to exempt. So when you read through the list of definitions, you probably skipped over the cross through. But there is a definition. Let me, and I can pull that up and show you. It's at the end of this document. And sorry for making you guys car sick over here. Oh, it's
It's
sorry.
page 2 of 3 of the.
Of the definitions, not of that.
In alphabetical order.
Well, it was when it was under nuisance.
Oh, it was under the news.
Right, but basically we have a list of the species: Australian pine, Brazilian pepper camper, Chinaberry citrus, ear pod.
Okay,
a
so
number of them.
these are considered nuisance trees.
Yep, and there's a reference that, so that's, the next thing is Melissa's comment, that there's a reference to the Florida invasive species list.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's never was is not proposed.
What is that?
Just a mighty voice.
They're all doing sound checks.
That wasn't for me.
That's highlighted from a committee meeting past. European competition.
Goes to the machinery.
Oh, there's the Gambini.
Shall we
I thought I was kidding.
That's weird.
You heard of Christmas Carol?
Yeah, it's her. That was my reference.
At any rate, so there is a definition, and it also references an organization. We did make the incorrect reference. Keith actually fixed it, and somehow I didn't take his, I don't know, something happened. But yes, we will have the correct reference here. And that's helpful because that list changes, so that if we just reference it, we don't have to always change the table in the definition.
Okay, and that addresses Melissa's comment about having a list of invasives. We're going to use that exotic pest plant invasive species.
Do you have,
Go ahead, Liz.
do you have that so we can see it now?
Yep. Yeah, and let me show you this. I meant to show you this as well.
It's available online.
If you look at our, oh geez.
All I needed was the page. Okay. Kendra, listen, seeing this is helpful.
Okay, I did want to show everybody the environmental management webpage. If you go to environmental permitting, so you can see all of the ordinances and all the issues that environmental permitting deals with. And if you click on trees, we have a ton of information on our website for applicants and everybody else. We've got all these links, the list of specimens and exempt trees. So, and then the applications, we've got lots of information about the value of trees, how to select and prune trees, lots of stuff here. And let me, oh, yeah.
Ginger, that's okay, I found it,
But I did want you to know that these resources are out there, and we direct our applicants here all the time. So if you click on this, then you go to the organization with the list of.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Sarah Lee?
In terms of definitions, I'm bringing this up now because this was one of them. In reading through the proposed ordinance, 3 terms are used that I could not find the definition of either within this ordinance or in 72-2. And I think it needs to be in one or the other, not another place on the website. And that is protected tree, exempt tree, and native vegetation.
Okay, I have an answer to that as well. Protected tree is true because we just added the word protected, and so yes, 100% that needs to be a definition. But exempt tree, we have as nuisance tree right now. We were proposing to strike through the word nuisance and use the word exempt.
I know, and so I looked up the word exempt tree, and I can't find the definition. I can find nuisance tree,
Right. We're proposing to change that same definition,
I got
change
it,
the name.
okay. Got it.
And,
Native vegetation.
native vegetation does exist as well. It's in chapter 50 and correct, and it needs to be added to 72 as well. So I can, I did find those and, one of them I just, failed to put in the document that I provided you when I was copying and pasting from all of the definitions in chapter 72. I missed deteriorated tree. So I've added that.
But that's in defined.
It is defined, yeah, but I forgot to put it in your document that I gave you.
Okay. Bill?
I had a quick question. So, I know we have historic specimens and protected, and in my mind, protected are the 6 specimens.
That is correct.
Are
No,
all
no.
the trees protected?
6 to everything. 6 and on up is
That's what it
protected.
needs defined.
Right.
Yeah.
So there needs to be another definition for the 6th specimen, because they're controlled differently. They're regulated differently.
Well, every tree over 6 inches is considered protected. There are different standards for protection, right? So specimens is a little bit different than standard, but a specimen tree is a protected tree. All specimens are protected. All historics are protected. What's not protected are those trees less than 6 inches in DBH.
Okay. Bob, did you have a comment?
I'm just, this is like an example of a little law being a dangerous thing, but the new law that was just passed by the legislation and the use of the word risk
Yes.
in determining whether or not a tree can be removed. So.
Yep, I have that here too, and so basically what the new law says is that a local government has to accept documentation from a certified arborist or a landscape architect that a tree presents danger. So they do use the word risk instead of hazard. The reason that we have in the past used the word hazard, and this is something that I think we're gonna have to talk with our legal folks, is because every tree, every car, every human poses a risk. Sometimes it's a very low risk, but it exists. A hazard, the reason we've used that is because that presents a specifically high risk, right? So the really healthy live oak tree that you have in your front yard is not a hazard, but there is a risk to any tree, right? And so that's why we've made that distinction in the past. So I think we could explore whether, well, and let me say this too. When this legislation passed, we did explore with our legal folks whether or not our code was compliant with the legislation or whether we needed to make immediate changes. And the determination was that there was nothing in our code that was counter to the state legislation. We didn't have to change anything immediately, but we do honor that if somebody comes to us and says, I had to remove this tree because it posed a risk, and here's the document that proves it.
Bob, are you satisfied with the state legislation acting as that definition?
There was a matrix, and I was scrolling through my papers here trying to find something that was in an article from the University of Florida on, how to assess hazard risk. We're really splitting hairs here with definitions, but they had a matrix that was pretty simple, and even I understood it. So that you could look at the tree and go through that process and go, yeah, this is over in the corner of a really extreme hazard, and that individual, should be able to remove that tree. And I think that's one of my comments where we were talking about whether or not to exempt historic trees from owner-occupied residents, is that they ought to have that mechanism.
So how about this, Bob? Can you provide that to Ginger, and then we'll readdress it? Keith, are you about to say something?
Yeah, so what the law does and what it utilizes is the ISA standard for tree risk assessment. And we have arborists that are tree risk assessment qualified, and we use that standard, and the law requires us to use that standard. So, I mean, we're not going to use UUS standard, we're using the industry standard.
they were just explaining the industry standard. I don't know
Okay.
the acronyms, but yeah, I was just thinking there should be a reference somewhere.
Right, if someone does that tree risk assessment on the tree, which is required by the law, we will accept that. And we do all the time, what we get a lot is a risk assessment written on a napkin and turned in after the tree's been removed. And, we have an ethics board, and we have turned people over to our ethics board. For a reason, so.
Okay, Bob, you're satisfied, and Jack?
Yeah, my question is about risking, we got most of it covered there. And so is what you're saying now, we're okay, we don't have to make new considerations of risk because we're addressing this already?
Well, the code has always had that deterioration, quota or a hazard section in it. We've always used that.
Right.
I mean, it's all the tree stuff, even the specimen, historic, it's all about the health of the tree.
So it's not changing anything. In other words, this legislation is not changing what we're doing and how we're assessing trees. Good. So it's not a consideration as we go through here and we say, well, we should put in here something about risk. We're already addressing that at this time. But thank you.
Melissa, do you still have a comment?
Yeah, just to be really clear, so the exempt trees that are on the invasive species council list, we really would like people to cut down their exotic invasives, correct? Because they displace native species. So I just think there was someone wondering, can I cut down that tree? I think it's great that it is always an updated list because you're pointing to a certain website or a certain place in the county website, but we listed them also, and there are inconsistencies in the listing, and I don't know if there's any way around that. So I'm just being a sticky wicket point on that, but if I'm applying, it's good for me to know. And I'm reading through it, I was confused.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, originally when we had the list, the little, chart in ordinance, there wasn't a flexi list. And times have changed, and so we have updated that, and it probably is worth updating. I mean, it is worth updating again, and looking at, do we not have any list in the ordinance, and we just reference the flexi list? The only thing though is we do talk about citrus in our list, which isn't necessarily considered an invasive, but it's exempt, which means if you cut down a citrus tree, it's not a protected tree, right? And I think we should still keep that, but there's I think a couple of ways we could do that. I did want to point out, I put up on the screen, so these are two definitions that didn't make it into the document that I sent out for review originally. Deteriorated tree, that definition does exist in chapter 72, and that's what we use, for instance, on a site plan or subdivision or any site, if we go out and it's a tree that meets this definition, then it is exempt from all permitting. So I know we'll get to it, but one of the comments is about like old ferneries or whatever. A lot of times those trees aren't in good shape, and if they're not in good shape, they don't count. Right? We don't penalize people for those trees. And then the other definition up there was to Sarah Lee's comment. What is the definition of native vegetation? Here is the definition. It right now only exists in chapter 50 in the minimum standard, and it does need to be included in 72. But we do have a definition.
Great. I'm moving on. Let's see. Okay, on this one, let me first ask Jessica to click. We're on the second page of the comments, page 3, lines. There are 3. These lines 75 all the way up to 82 are kind of the same thing in the comments. But first, let me ask Jessica to just clarify. You say revised to allow exemption on all single-family homes regardless of occupation or removed. So you're saying it could be one or the other. You're fine either way.
Yeah, I'm saying, based on the policy direction we get from the group, it doesn't make sense to have a requirement for owner occupied. It's either, is there a single family lot exemption or is there a exemption? I'm okay either way.
Okay. Well, then Bill said he wants it to remain exempt. Alice, Melissa, Jack said no exemption. And so that's kind of where it stands on who commented. Bill, are you so strongly in favor of remaining exempt? Do you want to make some points on why you want to keep, or you're okay to acquiesce? All right. So I think then, unless there's other comments on why we should, this is going to be a not no exemption. We
Eliminate,
will eliminate the exemption for historic trees on single-family residential lots.
okay, I'd like to ask a question though to Jessica's comment. The reason that it's owner occupied is because the exemption does not apply to a vacant residential lot.
Right.
So maybe, so owner occupied is one discussion, but vacant versus an already there's a building on it is definitely a distinction worth making that we want to continue to make.
So I'm trying to think, if you're our single family lot and you live there already, you're owner occupied, you're in the house, what reason do you have to destroy a historic tree other than it's dead, dying, disease, in which case it wouldn't be regulated?
Oh.
I get that.
I'll have John to make a comment.
Anecdote.
So another reason is that your insurance company requires it. And there've been several of those types of letters going out. We won't insure you if that tree is too close to your house. And that's where the interpretation of the forester comes in, says, remove it. We don't.
Okay, but are they saying that because it's a risk or hazard?
Yeah, but what they think is a risk is, I mean, I'm sorry.
Well, I like to add that my insurance company said the same thing to me. They said, when we come over to your house, we're gonna take a picture, we're gonna look up, and we wanna see God from the ground. That's what they told me.
Yeah.
So you're not gonna do that in my house. There's tree limbs all over the house. That's what's going to happen. Come over, I wrote them a really nice letter, signed it, ISA certified arborist, handed it to them, and I heard nothing more from them. So those customers have that option as well.
Sure. Jeff, are you comfortable with having the no exemption for these occupied houses?
You're saying removing it?
Correct, remove the exemption that currently exists.
Yeah, but I want to hear more about why we should keep it. Because I
Go ahead.
comment on why there are reasons.
Why we should keep
An exemption.
an exemption, okay. Anyone here from Melissa? You're pointing at Melissa?
No, I'm having trouble with double negatives, okay? So to clarify, first, you brought up the point that there was an inconsistency, and that's always a problem, an inconsistency between an owner-occupied residential dwelling and a single lot. Okay, single lot had to make an application to remove the historic tree. Owner-occupied was exempt from asking for permission. I want everybody to ask for permission. I personally do. And is that enough? Thank you.
Bill? Oh, wait, John?
Oh, I'm sorry,
No,
no.
okay, Bill?
So maybe it's owner occupied versus rental.
I don't think that's good. So I think what we have right now, and I think Melissa hit it well, is that if you live in your house, you can do whatever you want. But if you're building a house, you can't. If you're renting a house, you can't. If it's a vacant lot, you can't. Like, this doesn't make sense. There should be one set of rules. Just because the owner lives in the house. And if the rule is nobody has to, we're not going there, then that's one thing. But I think the rule is everyone should have to.
Okay, so we will strike the exemption so that everyone has to ask to remove a historic tree. Correct, okay. Good. Tyler?
My question was going to be, so if you get the letter from the insurance company, you don't have an arborist letter to argue back with the insurance company. We now have a rule that you can't cut the tree down, you go before council, without permission, you go before council. Is the county liable for that owner not having insurance if they deny cutting the tree down? Do we need to have like automatic approval type of situation?
Yeah, can you make a contingency that if they submit the letter from their insurance, that they have to take it down? That would be satisfactory? Not necessarily, go ahead, Cynthia.
For the record, I'm on the
Well,
side of moving the exemption.
just like we have expressed, comments about how much power the county forester has in this ordinance, let's not give undue power to the insurance company. I mean, they already have lots of things going in their favor. the thing that is troublesome to me in this is there are some people who have the wherewithal to go hire an arborist to argue with the insurance company, and there are many people who do not. And I also don't think it's appropriate to put the burden on the county to go fight with insurance companies on behalf of property owners. So that's the issue we have, but I would absolutely object to just because an insurance company wants the tree down does not necessarily make it worthy of removal.
Okay, well, and to address Tyler, you know, I see his point, but what about that homeowner who's in a bad spot? You're suggesting,
You know,
It sucks for them, and so if that
Well,
happens to me.
I think I have an answer for that.
okay, go ahead.
So just because it's not exempt doesn't mean you couldn't get a permit to remove it.
Right.
And so maybe so in that case, a homeowner wants to remove a historic tree, who knows, maybe they need to put in a shed, for whatever reason, or their insurance company says that, they still apply for a tree removal permit and they could still be granted a tree removal permit. The question would be, is there any consideration given on the replacement requirement? Because replacing a historic tree is not a cheap proposition. Is there some consideration given if it's something like my insurance company is demanding that I remove it? Because the homeowner is already going to incur a lot of expense to remove the big tree. It's not cheap. So, that could be something where they're not exempt. You'd have to get a permit, but there's, some ability to understand why that tree has to come out if it's not like your choice,
Yeah, I think maybe honestly having a guide that says, if you get a letter from your insurance company, here are the things that you can do, here's what the implications would be in the county, here's the process if you can keep the tree, of how to get the permit for its removal. I think we're gonna take away the power, because if I were in this situation, I'd be super pissed if I found out this rule just changed. And I'd be sitting at a council meeting complaining, even sitting, as a member of the committee today, I can't do that obviously, but I mean.
Okay, so an education piece to provide, to give that relief to residents. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm just going to be brief on this, but just for an example, 30 years ago, I landscaped my house and I planted this beautiful little oak tree that looked great at the time, and now it's outgrown and it's next to my house and it's a risk. And I want to change my landscape. Now I got to go get a permit to remove that. I think it's just too much regulation at the hands of individuals' rights, to be honest with you. And so my colors are going to show here, but I think it's a lot of burden on individuals and taking rights away from them that they should already have. I'm against keeping or eliminating the exemption.
Bill?
Yeah, and one good point that Ginger brought up is if you don't have the exemption and you get a permit to relocate or take down a historic tree, you have to replace it. That'll be part of the permitting process. So you gotta pay thousands of dollars to take the tree out, and then you have to pay thousands of dollars to put in replacement trees. So maybe I am more on keeping the exemption.
Okay. I'm gonna have Wendy go ahead. She has made a comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with John in principle, actually. I mean, we might
We are not, so don't do it.
we might have not in some ways, but I guess we would say it's not likely that a tree that a current homeowner planted would have achieved historic status within that homeowner's lifetime. And so if we're talking about a 36-inch oak tree, I'm looking at the forester now, that's not likely less than 100 years old. So I agree that property owners should have rights, but not necessarily the right to take down trees that were on the property before that property owner.
Well, I did prepare a list of trees because the board want to talk about, how long does it take for a tree to become historic, or how long does it take for a longleaf pine to grow. Look at a couple of studies, one out of the University of Georgia, where they studied live oak trees. And in the appropriate conditions, they kind of stated that they can grow as much as 3/4 of an inch in caliber a year. So you could get to a historic tree within 35, 40 years. But I mean, that's rare. You're not going to have a site that has perfect conditions. So, you know, half inch a year is probably a pretty good rule, and you could get to one in 40, 50 years fairly easily.
Okay. Jessica?
Yeah, I was gonna say on the burden, my concern, I understand the property rights discussion, but I don't think that you should have a different standard because you own the property and live in the house versus if you rent it. So that is a disparity that doesn't make sense. I think what Ginger was saying about fees makes sense. And I think that saying that there's, you know, replacement fees would be waived, you know, upon a certified letter from an insurance company requiring removal. We can do anything, language, that's not allowed. So we can build that in, which I think will reduce some of the burden. But I think what we're doing here is giving the county oversight to say, it's okay that it's occurred. You know, we have our sign off, we went through the review process, it's a step, it's a burden on property rights, you can do whatever you want, but we live in a society and we can't do it.
And Bernie?
I also just wanted to comment that I'm also not in favor of removing the exemption, mainly because of the impact on personal property rights, you know, which you're supposed to do with your game, so to speak, is constantly infringed upon, and this just be another example of it. I've got some examples of historic trees that have been created in 40 to 50 years, so it is possible for it to happen in your lifetime. And I do think there is a distinction between owner-occupied and rented houses. I don't think you get the same rights if you don't own the property. I think that's kind of why the ordinance was created that way.
Yeah, my liberal side's coming out here. In one hand, I can see the rationale to remove the exemption. You know, on the other hand, you know, I agree with, you know, John Barney that we're stepping on, you know, property rights. And I guess where I kind of maybe go into the middle there is if our government, which we pay for through our taxes, and we all deem this particular, you know, thing to be important, then our government should take care of that process. So, you know, I could support the elimination of the exemption, but only if the burden, you know, of application and fees and everything else were shifted over to the local government. So that, you know, okay, we have this avenue and we've got it in big print in the ordinance that you have to go in and you still have to go through this process. But rather than, you know, Johnny homeowner who doesn't have a clue on how the process works or what he needs to provide to Keith to, you know, go through this process, the entire onus of the application process falls on the government body.
You mean like they fill out the app, I mean.
The entire process.
Melissa?
No, I'm not sure that what my comment is. This is kind of why at the beginning I said, what is our overall feeling about trees? Property rights are sacrosanct under our constitution, our state constitution, and the Florida state legislature obliged us to write it into our comprehensive plan last year. But they aren't absolute. We agree on certain things. And if we as a society agree that trees are important, then we have to not make it so simple to do away with them. But just talking big picture. And one of the reasons that trees are important, I don't know, some people may care about this, some people may not. As of 2018, 54% of United States land territory was an urban-suburban matrix. And so that means that contiguous landscapes are fragmented, are highly, highly fragmented. And that means that what we do on our own homes matters, including having those trees. So I still am in favor of their not being just a blanket exemption, and in a way I'm very colored by this, by what I see going on in my own neighborhood. You know, someone moved from New Jersey, they're building a great big house, I'm taking out the magnolia before I even know that there's a reason that I might want that shade in my backyard, because I've never spent a Florida summer before. Or if someone wants to put in a swimming pool, they should have the right to do that. And if they put in that pool, there's no way on an average suburban lot that they could ever put in a replacement tree. So I don't know what the answer is there. But I think that there's a message that we send that says trees have value. And I think that is what in a way guides me on this. And how are we respectful of individual rights? And Clay prefaced everything saying we can't write a perfect statute. But it seems to me that this ordinance starts out saying that trees matter, and because they matter, we have certain rules and regulations that we've agreed to as a society.
Can we feel comfortable, Bernie, John, Bob, if you take out the exemption, it allows for a case-by-case basis where you're not just blatantly saying you can never remove it. We are asking you to go through this process. Now, to Bob, you said you were getting liberal. That wasn't very liberal, I think. But, I mean, you must admit that is not.
That was liberal. I was
Give it to the government.
Yeah, I was giving to the government property rights, to my government, property. That's
so,
liberal.
Okay, well, would you agree you're okay to not fight for that? You're not really fighting for that now, Bob, right? You just threw it out as a comment? Or are you going to fight for it? I would have to just put it to a vote, but is that something you really want to?
If there's no, and I'm not married to a particular solution, but if there's no caveat and you're removing the exemption, I'm voting against it. Okay? There's got to be some kind of a caveat, and I'm wide open to what that is to the homeowner. But there's got to be something in there that gives the
resident
and the resident,
what
a simpler way to go.
What about Tyler's idea of one, if they come, there is a list, resources, how do you go through this process? The other piece of it is, I do agree if it is an insurance issue, and Sarah Lane, are you comfortable with this, that they can use that to then offset the cost of having to replant. They cannot have to replant and have that cost burden on their own property. Can that be, is that acceptable to this group?
And if it's deteriorated by the definition, then it wouldn't require a permit at all, right? So if it's an issue with that tree that's been deemed a hazard, or the tree's deteriorated, that's no permit, that's no replacement, that's no nothing. It really gets, where you get into the replacement issue is if you have a healthy tree and you just feel like cutting it down, right? So, I think we could write some language about insurance issues or the risk assessment or, that kind of thing. Keith reminded me that many of the cities actually require tree removal permits on single family and owner occupied now. That DeLand does that, I know South Daytona does that, I think Ormond does. So we don't, it's a big county, right? And we haven't done that, but some of the cities do take it that one step further.
Okay. We may be at a point where we'll have to make a motion and just put this. Oh, I'm sorry, Melissa, oh my goodness, you're on my curve. So go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm against removing the exemption until we fully investigate the conservation fee alternative and that whole subcommittee structure, see if there's something there. Because otherwise, I feel that the burden, there's undue burden on the landowner for the letter or the arborist or something. It's the burden is theirs. And there are cities that already have ordinances for this, but I can cite several instances from my own personal experience where trees have been matured in that amount of time for a landowner who has built that house when nothing else was there and planted all these trees, and in their lifetime before they had died, that tree has become a hazard to the structure itself. So, that is possible. I know it, I've lived it. So I just think it's been a little carried away without.
I think that's totally reasonable to table it. We don't have to decide right now until we come back with the fact finding. Jackie Butcher's down, Sarah Lane, and I'll go to Jessica.
Oh, yeah,
I'm sorry, Sarah Lane, and then Jessica. Sarah Lane.
Okay. I would actually like to not decide this issue right now. When Mr. Hoblit made his points, one of the things I started thinking about, or it might have been you, if a homeowner is coming forward to remove a historic tree that is historic at that point in time, because it was a tree that was planted because of the ordinance requirements, right? Because you drive around some of our communities, and we have communities that absolutely are meeting, or really close to meeting historic trees, because they planted trees as part of either an ordinance or a design consideration. You know, that is very different to me than, you know, some of the other things I've heard described. But it makes me think about other provisions within this ordinance that I think we talked about early on when people were making their preliminary comments. So whereas I thought I had an opinion on this, I don't know what my opinion is right now. And I'd actually like us to keep going and perhaps come back to this.
I think that's reasonable. Jessica?
Yeah, I'll do mine as two for thought then. Originally said, maybe make it single family, and the designation of owner occupied still doesn't sit well with me. And if it's the will of the committee that this exemption has value, and there's not ways to safeguard the concerns they have and they want to keep it, I think that we need to look at the scope. I think that it still needs to change from what it is now. So if you have, and we have this all the time, somebody from out of state who says, I bought my dream lot in the subdivision, and they close, and it's a cash deal, and they say, oh, there's 10 historic trees on the lot, and I can't build anything, and I didn't know. It's still property rights, they still own it, there's no stuff in that situation. It's just whether or not they live in a house or not, they're treated differently. And so if we see value in this exemption, I think we need to still work on it as well.
Okay, oh, go ahead, Liz.
Just one little comment there about this, this subdivision where a developer has left a lot that they are selling and it has historic trees on it. In my opinion, just listening to what you had to say, you just incentivized that developer to go ahead and get rid of those trees, one way or another. And we don't want it.
That's what goes on a lot.
Exactly.
In our development
We
process.
incentivize them to get rid of the trees.
Instead of.
It's like, can't wait till we get to the red zone.
Yeah, there's the answer, incentivize them to keep it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm confused though, because that's a protected tree, so if they get rid of it, they're doing it in violation of the ordinance. And just hoping they don't get caught, I guess, is that what you're saying?
We both know examples where it is now.
But making them exempt would also make them remove the trees, I guess.
Yeah, they're gonna be unethical, they're gonna be unethical, I guess. Okay, so we will table that with, we'll keep it up when we come back to it, that we'd like to examine, you know, some stipulations around whether it's single family, occupied, not occupied. Okay, so moving on, page 3, line 8487. This was Bob, line 100. Okay, so you were having an issue with trees for sale not being exempt. If you buy property with trees that were for sale and they are not exempt, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Ginger?
So an example would be a fernery, where all the trees planted in a fernery are, you know, it's a monoculture. They're all one specific type of tree. They were planted for shade in that area. Another example would be a nursery that grew palm trees. And there's hundreds and hundreds of palm trees on the property, but none of them were part of an old growth forest. It's a monoculture. You know, they shouldn't fall under the same guidelines as,
Understood.
you know, a fresh piece of wood somewhere.
Right. And Ginger, is there?
Well, so I'll provide a little bit of information. So the fernery example, a lot of times those trees meet the definition of deteriorated. We see, you know, new development proposals on those lots a lot, and we meet with the forester or the surveyor or whatever, and a lot of those trees are deteriorated, so they're exempt. But if there's a good healthy tree on a lot that used to be a fernery, and it's going to become a subdivision, then that's a protected tree right now. The other example of if it was like trees that were grown for sale to the public, those are exempt. And especially in your example of palms, probably they're a nuisance species, so they're probably exempt as well. We think we have that pretty much covered with the deteriorated and the trees grown for sale are exempt. But, it's worth a discussion with the group for sure.
Sure, I'm gonna allow Bliss to, just a note that we'll take a break in about 9 minutes, okay, just a quick one. So go ahead, Bliss.
Okay, so for clarification on the trees grown for sale, you have a silviculture farm. All these trees are grown for sale, but you harvest them over so many years. So are these trees for sale, exempt as well?
Yeah, typically they're exempt for another reason, which is they're in a zoning category that's tree exempt. So if you see up on the screen, if it's over 2.5 acres and it's one of those zonings, A1, A2, A3, A4, those are all ag zonings. RC is typically where you see a lot of silviculture. C is conservation, we're proposing to add that. So, and then FR, you see at the end, FR. So almost always, silviculture operations are one of those zoning categories because that's where silviculture is permitted. So they're already exempt.
Okay, so for one point of clarification, the 3-year, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, whatever year. So are we saying, because I've gotten confused on this, are we saying that the person you're buying some silviculture land, and the next person wants to rezone it, are we saying that they cannot do anything with it for X amount of year?
No, we're not saying they can't do anything with it. What it says is that if you have a piece of property that is tree exempt now, one of these zoning categories is an ag property, and you remove the trees because it's exempt, and then you come in a year later to do a site plan, we presume that you remove those trees in anticipation of the future development to get out of the tree requirements. So that's the thing. It's not that you can't remove the trees, you can absolutely remove the trees, but then you need to keep being an ag operation. If at some point, and right now it says 3 years, if within 3 years you come in to do a subdivision, or you come in to do a site plan, or you rezone it to some urban or some development category, the presumption is that that tree removal is done in anticipation of the development.
Okay, I'll ask the question this way. I'm a silviculture farmer. I'm old, I'm sick, whatever. I decided I'm going to harvest. So my health continues to deteriorate. I sell the property a year and a half later. So then the new buyer is buying clear-cut land. Are they going to be held to the 3-year standard with that land? Because it was already clear-cutted under the Silviculture Act. They're buying it as clear-cut land. So are we saying they still can't do anything with it for X amount of years?
Potentially, well.
Yeah, it still wouldn't be the rebuttable presumption. It's not saying you can't do anything with it. You can come in and see that particular instance happened, they cleared it, and they sold it within 2 years. If someone comes in and wants to develop it, they just have to get a tree removal permit, provide, their plantings. Yep, what you do a statistical tree analysis on site of what was there. So it's not
what was there.
Yeah.
Aerial photos.
Aerial photos, a lot that's next door that wasn't cleared. There are ways that we do statistical analysis all the time. So it's not, it stops you from development. It's just, you have to do the tree replacement that you would have to do if it wasn't cleared.
And I think the thought is, if that new buyer comes in to buy property that's not zoned for the type of development they want, then they have to pay for those tree replacements. Otherwise, they're buying it for ag purposes and it's exempt. You see?
Okay, so what if an out-of-state buyer comes and they don't know when those trees were cut? They look at it, they're buying vacant land.
And I don't know, would that be part of their due diligence process though?
Yes.
To find out, if this will apply to them? I think it might be. Tyler, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think my other question would be, have we enforced this rule at all? and its history?
Yes.
Is this something that we have a frequent enforcement history on? Has it been successful?
Yes, it does have, and we have enforced on it, and it is successful.
Okay, has there been litigation against the county that's resulted?
No.
Okay. And part of the reason I'm asking these questions is I think it is extremely hard to, especially for somebody that's buying land, to determine this. This leaves a lot of jeopardy for a potential purchaser. And ultimately that could come down to, is it something that needs to be disclosed during the sale? And then I'm not a real estate attorney, I would be looking at Jessica, but you know, that's all something that's a liability. So somebody comes in, they have the sour grapes. It's a situation where you have a winner and a loser, and the person that's getting punished is the loser, unfortunately. And the person who broke the rule or, you know, is disingenuous is still getting away with it. They're getting the benefit of selling vacant land at market value for vacant land instead of treating land. I'm just going to use this as part of my marketing pitch for being concerned with the current density of trees on the property as what we have to plant back when we develop it creates these types of situations where a landowner has an incentive to cheat. Having just a minimum that we need to have post-development allow existing trees, new trees, whatever, to count towards that. It eliminates all of these types of contests. But if we haven't been having litigation, you know, if this happened to me, if I were in the situation, I would ask, where's the legal basis in the case history on your determination of the amount of trees? I would argue that you've over-determined it, and you know, and I'm not an expert on it, but that's where I would try to go as a property owner. So I'm just thinking like an asshole, like, you know, are they setting themselves up for a bunch of assholes to come and vote?
These rules have been in existence for 40 years.
Okay.
When you buy a property, you knew or you should have known that these rules were in existence, and that's on you. It's like driving down the highway doing 80 miles an hour and saying, I didn't know I was speeding.
Well, but I don't know everything that a prior owner does that is or isn't allowed. I mean, I can't have a full history of occupational use of a piece of property when I purchased it. That's an unreasonable burden.
Pardon me, real quick, let me jump into the discussion. As someone who worked with Bill Likes over at Zebcon, one of the responsibilities we had at Zebcon was doing due diligence for land purchases. Part of that was exploring whether or not land had been cleared within the last 3 years, because we as the design professionals who were consulted before the acquisition of the land, we had to go back through and make sure our client had basically a clean bill of health to do the development program. So Bill and I would both look and see, were there wetlands on site? Were they cleared since 1986 or impacted? Because yes, you're correct. The original owner of the property who is selling it for, you know, basically raw land, cleared it and is not going to have to pay for the mitigation, because ultimately when that land is transferred into a development phase, then the owner at that time pays for that mitigation. Similar situation is occurring here. So is there an inherent risk for anyone buying raw land that they may be in trouble because wetlands, illegal clearing, or legal clearing, which has a 3-year time frame? So the fact is that yes, there's always inherent risk whenever you're buying raw land. What we're talking about here is trying to prevent the very distinct and conscientious effort to skirt our regulations by clearing the land for development. And you ask, have we done this many times? I've only been with the county now 7 years, and I'm only aware of one situation where it's occurred. Because I can tell you this much, most of the agricultural people who are actively working their land are very aware of it, contact us, and I know Keith has gone on site with one large landowner, gone through what they were planning on doing, reviewed it, identified some critical areas for future use, and the land's sitting right now as a pasture, has been for the last 6 years, and will continue to do so. If they sell it, can they come in and develop that pasture for something that may be allowed by the land use? Yes.
Yeah. Let's have, oh, go ahead, John.
Just, and to follow up on that pasture's clear, it's zoned 1 unit per 10 acres, it's a 700 acre lot, they can come in and put any house on 10 acres they want, even though they've cleared it.
Correct.
Sure. I'm gonna do Jessica, Bliss, and Bob, and then we'll take a quick break. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, just from a practical side of it, because we run into it too in the question on, is there, developers follow the look back. So most developers know that these structures exist, and they look for them, and they check them in their due diligence. You'll see it doesn't apply to building permit application. The structures only apply to large development activities, site plan rezoning, where you have what I'm going to call it, it's not an insult, it's just a term of art, a sophisticated buyer in the deal who's supposed to look at these things. I would say that the key for me and why I'm okay with keeping it at 3 years and leaving it as it is it's rebuttable. So if you clear all the trees and you had an agricultural reason behind it, and you then put cows out, or you grew hay, or you did whatever follows that clearing from an agricultural perspective, you rebut the presumption and you move on. The 3 years doesn't matter. If not, you have to keep it in agricultural activity for 3 years after that.
You just can't rezone it away from agriculture within the 3 years.
You can't. So if you rezone it, tell me if I'm wrong, but you rezone it from agricultural. 2.5 years ago, you cleared pasture for cows. For a year, you put cows on it. That was an agricultural use. It was appropriate. It was legitimate. You rebutted the presumption that it was not for agricultural use, and you move on.
Right, that's why it's called a rebuttable presumption. So we presume that you did it in anticipation of development, but you can rebut our presumption by providing evidence that it was done for valid agricultural reasons. And we have had cases where there really was no rebuttal, right? Like clearly this was done, like you already had a site plan drawn up and then you cleared your trees, right? And in that case, the county has prevailed. But there are cases where the property owner comes in and says, hey, I legitimately did this clearing because I have an agricultural operation and my situation changed, whatever, the elder died and they sold off the land, right? You can rebut our presumption. You just have to have some decent evidence that says what you did was legit.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I didn't understand that. Melissa?
Well, I appreciate the clarification, because that addressed what I was going to ask, because I was going to say this was legitimately done, the elder passed, the estate selling it,
right.
that sort of thing. So I appreciate the clarification.
Do you guys mind if we take like 2 minutes, just get your water, do your vein? 5 minutes.
He was trespassed from that because he was assaulted. This is it.
One person is on here, they must enjoy when their microphone came on. They're muted now.
I thought it was a Milan airport.
It was just too clear to be radio.
Okay, so if I do this.
I might take this off.
I think I'm gonna set it out. I got my best guys on the job.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, you know what, at this point in time, I think Harry and I are like Brad, where he's got to actually have really good argument here to pass the checks, so.
Well, it's not your turn, so.
Oh, yeah, and once, basically what happened is Harry said until like the last second. And if I don't make an issue, then he sues it. In case I start making an issue, Justin made an issue. And Harry went to, he's like, well, what are we gonna do? So, we just gotta keep Harry.
I'm very simple. It's like, well, we're way down. You want to say they're eligible?
Well, that's, some of these things come out and I can't remember what actually the program is. It's like,
You'll learn so much.
I still can't believe but that's
This is not that.
Yeah,
It's a lot different.
I know it's a lot, and that's what I'm saying. I don't know what the stuff is. Brad is not the expert, he's president of sales. Well, it's like the guy that comes through door to site every
for solar panels or whatever, he's not gonna be the first to install it. Good, I figured to make sure that I was seeing that correctly, because I want to ignore it as much as possible.
Yeah, you're good.
How's everything else?
Good.
God bless you. Ginger. Amelia Jane. Call her Amelia Jane.
I tried to leave her place like that.
Yeah, she's a pretty little thing, but doesn't sleep.
Yeah.
Is this your first?
Yeah, the only one that we don't have.
Was that right?
4 weeks. No, I declared this 2 years ago when I agreed to have this. But this was my wife wanted a child very, very bad. She's 38 and I'm 36. I wanted to retire at 50 very, very badly. This was the conflict of our life dreams, and so I lost. It's awesome. I'm excited to get that. But one's good. Yeah. I still want to retire before I'm 65. So.
Do you think that having a kid because of the extra money that's going to take?
Because of the extra money I will spend for her and for the family and doing that type of stuff, and because I'll work less. I mean, I'm going to work a lot less than I was before.
To be with the family. That's good though.
Some of its availability is less.
For the holidays?
Hospital.
It's better when they
I mean, it's great, but it's just so weird.
Twin girls. One girl was
I think it's just that they have each other. They cause trouble. One kid is, I'm convinced that it's not a mathematical equation. One kid is one kid. 2 kids is like 4. And then 3, I don't know.
They went through similar situations. And they had emergencies. Years. One piece of advice. So I'm sharing this because I want to really study what to do. And the last time I was late, I felt crazy.
Yeah, it's been about 6 minutes actually. We want to go ahead and start making our way to our seats. John, you guys want to make your way back?
Sure. Better get one behind you too.
That's right.
Don't sleep.
Yeah. You guys want to go ahead?
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Good chair.
Right. point about the forest house, we'll get back to that, but let's go ahead, since we're deep in it, we're addressing the 1 year, 3 year, so the list that said should be 1 year, it's currently at 3. Jessica and Bill say remain at 3. Bob and Jack, 5 years. Said 10 to 20 years. So let's continue this discussion, see if we can find some consensus on how many years. I want to make sure I understand this because I think this is kind of a game changer. The rebuttable I thought 3 years was in stone. You have to wait 3 years. No, you can rebut if you honestly had agriculture, then what difference does it make if it's 5 years or 10 years or, right? If you were genuinely doing agriculture and you can rebut the presumption, are we really hooked on, Melissa, do you still feel 1 year knowing that you can rebut it if there was a legitimate agriculture operation?
I would have to think about it, because I still think that puts the burden on the landowner. And somebody's going to be penalized, whether it was. I'd have to give that some.
Okay.
Well, and here,
go ahead.
I just put up on the screen, sort of the next section, which is what we would look at if someone tried to rebut the presumption. So you'd have to provide exactly why you removed the trees. We'd look at how long that property been in ag production. We'd look at the size of the area, right? If you say, well, I cleared it to have a cow operation, but you only cleared 2 acres, right? So, I mean, here's what, this is existing language, right? So this is what we would look at if we thought someone had cleared property, under the ag exemption in anticipation of development, they would provide this information. And then that's what exists now.
Okay. John?
Yeah, so what happens if somebody's found in violation? What happens?
So typically what would happen is, we would find out about it because they've come in to apply for something. They come in to apply for a subdivision and we look at the aerial photos and say, oh, geez, this was fully treed 2 years ago. We kind of say, explain to us, why we shouldn't presume that you cleared it in anticipation. They provide an affidavit that says all of these things. Then the county forester can approve or deny the exemption. If the county forester denies the exemption, so if the evidence points to the fact that it was cleared, in anticipation of development, we could deny the exemption and we would say you're responsible for the tree replacement that you would have been responsible for if you hadn't cleared the trees already. And we would use, statistical methods to identify the amount of trees that were on the lot based on similar lots or whatever. There is an opportunity to appeal that denial of the county forester. So any decision of the county forester gets appealed to the Development Review Committee, and that is a 3-person committee. It's the Growth Management Director, Economic Development, and the Public Works Director, or is that right? Public Works, yeah. And if the appeal got denied at the DRC, the applicant could appeal all the way to the county council. So there are a number of ways to appeal, and or compliance would be that you provide replacement just like you would have if you hadn't cleared it to begin.
And how many instances of this has happened over the past 5 years?
Handful. Yeah, a handful of times. Most people, they do this, landowners know this is in here. They clear it and they wait 3 years.
Right.
Yeah, so they come in 3 years, 6 months and develop a problem.
So the point is we're, as a community, looking about how this county grows responsibly. And this is obviously an irresponsible act. Should there be tougher penalties on that backside for such actions rather than trying to put that onerous, if the ag land use, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but it seems like the violation was on purpose. And if I remember right, I thought that there was even a point to where you would have to go back and pay your back taxes for an elevated land value or something of that nature, but no, okay. Well, I just think if that happens, then it should be tougher penalties. We're not in the penalty phase, but if we're going to be responsibly growing this county, we need responsible developers along the way.
Bob?
I guess this goes back to the earlier discussion about, some kind of minimum standard where instead of penalizing, we incentivize. If there was incentives out there for the developer to save the trees rather than penalties when he buys a piece of property that has a ton of trees on it, you wouldn't have landowners doing this.
Did I see Bill?
And so the other penalty is that they would then have to pay the money for the replacement trees and hire somebody to do the statistical survey, which is probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I really think it kind of gets back to Tyler's issue is instead of penalizing people for taking out trees, let's try to encourage them to plant back and have something functional.
Okay, the setup I see is a person owns agriculture land, zoned agriculturally, and they want to use it for that purpose. It would be disingenuous, right, to clear that land and take advantage of the tree. So I need to clear it to have my cows. So we're not going to incentivize that person to keep the trees. It's a necessity. You see what I mean? So I'm not against incentives because I think that's a better way of having people conform. But I think in this situation, all they're trying to mitigate is those people, unscrupulous people who are trying to get around paying for what they rightfully should pay for, which is trees, right?
Well, that's the agricultural owner who's trying to circumvent the regulations. And the reason he's doing that is because he knows the value of the property is greater than the developer if the developer doesn't have to deal with trees. I'd much rather go buy 100 acres of pasture than 100 acres of tree land. All right? And the ag guy knows that. And that's where this perversion takes place. All right? If I wasn't so penalized for buying a piece of property that had a bunch of trees on it, the ag guy wouldn't play that game.
I think the problem that I see here is we're dealing with disingenuous people. We're dealing with somebody that is trying to cheat, break the rules, lie, be dishonest to us. So whatever rules we put in, they're going to try to find a way to break. And so when we put in rules that create a process of enforcement that puts a burden on Keith and his staff, we're dependent on Keith and his staff. And if we don't have Keith and his staff and something happens and we have a vacancy, we don't have a good process in place. And so to me, we're dependent on enforcement, we're dependent on a penalty type of process to get the goal that we have of save more trees and plant more trees. Well, if instead of saying you have to replace a tree, you just said you need to have this many inches of trunk area on your site after development per acre or something else, you can use existing trees, you can use planted trees, you can use whatever you want. The issue becomes the loss of biodiversity, the loss of the old growth trees. And so then we look at the historic trees and protection of a couple of those components. But I think when you protect every tree, make a survey of every tree, we then get an argument over who identified the species of the tree, the location of it. I'm walking a 100-acre site trying to find an 8-inch tree or an 18-inch tree or something, and I'm definitely not the tree expert, but I'm the guy that's out there trying to figure it out a lot of times. That doesn't produce the results on the back end of the development. The developers aren't being incentivized to give us what we're trying to achieve. And so that's where I think a prescriptive criteria that's instead of focusing on whether the land was cleared or not as determining whether or not we have a bunch of trees in the finished product, we should focus on we want to have a bunch of the finished product. So by clearing it, you're actually going to cost the developer more money because they have to go back and plant more of those trees back regardless. And so if it's for a bona fide ag use, you're taking away some value in future development if you clear everything, which means that maybe it will have more incentive to stay in the bona fide ag use.
Jessica?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say to John's point about enforcement, it's not here, because this is dealing with specifically, shifting to development, but even if you have ag land and you're keeping it ag land, and you went out and tore down a bunch of historic trees, and someone informs the county you did it, or the county realizes it, and you go to build a shelter or something, there's separate enforcement mechanisms outside of this that they can use that doesn't relate to the look back provision, but you just go to approve. And we've been there.
That's true, except on ag land. Trees are exempt on ag land. Trees, all trees are exempt on ag land. But yes, basically what you said is true. Yeah.
Could I buy 1,000 acres, build a house on it, clear the whole 1,000 acres and not have any rule you could hit me with because it's under occupied?
If you cleared the trees after you built your house and moved into your house, yes. You would have to get a tree permit for whatever trees you removed in the zoning setbacks. That's a clarification that we need to talk about. So the only trees that are protected on a single-family residential lot are the trees in the zoning setbacks. The trees in the buildable area of the lot are exempt from tree permitting. So, except for historic. So, yes, you could save all the trees in your zoning setback, build your house, move in, take out every tree.
So there's a bigger loophole that already exists that we're not addressing.
There are a couple of ways you can clear lots. It's through the subdivision process, which is typically what you guys see. And there's the individual lot process under the code that we already have. And she just explained the individual lot process. So what that does is it incentivizes the developer to wait to clear a lot at a later date. So you're not mass cleared. When you clear the whole subdivision, you've got to replace all the trees. And we'll get into that. We have exhibits and all that stuff.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to understand that. I'm gonna go Bill and then Melissa. Yeah, this part. Oh, okay, Melissa is.
I just had a question for clarification because in the ordinance, it talks about clearing 20%, no more than 20% a year. And is that what you are referring to at this time? And if not, I don't follow.
That's in the subdivision clearing process. And typically developers ask the DRC for waivers and the DRC typically grants.
So they go in and clear everything all at once?
If they're granted that waiver, then they can clear all the lots and the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Because I don't know if I'm getting into another tangent. First of all, everything Tyler talked about, it made my temper a little bit, but I think it was worth thinking about.
All right, I'm going to pull the subdivision exhibit that we have yet. So you can kind of see what we're talking about here. So this is a subdivision that we recently approved, and they split it into two phases. Phase 1 and 2 got a 20% lot clearing waiver from the DRC to clear phase 1 and 2. And then phase 3, they're starting to clear here in a month or so. So this was done under subdivision rules. They're going to clear all those lots in those phases all at one time, right? And so by doing that, they had to set aside enough tree preservation and tree protection areas in the subdivision to offset the clearing of those lots. Because of that, they saved 35% of this subdivision in tree preservation and natural vegetation retention areas. When you remove those, you can disincentivize removing trees or tree replacement, provide tree replacement, they don't have to save as much.
So does that make sense? So if this developer had chosen to leave the lots wooded, then they would have not had to provide any replacement for the trees on the lots. And then at the time of each building permit, we would apply the residential tree standards, which means only the trees in the setbacks are protected. And that would happen lot by lot. We would look at each permit. In this case, they wanted to clear all the lots, so they were on the hook for all the tree replacement. And the way they met the tree replacement was by saving existing small trees. That's how they ended up with so much tree preservation area. And that is the incentive to clear the lots later, right? Because we incentivize keeping lots wooded by having a reduced replacement requirement if you do it at the time of each lot. Does that, everybody kind of get that? Does that help?
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you. That's what you guys.
Single family lots.
Okay, yeah, let's show you this. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, here's an example. Okay, let's talk about this one.
So this is what Ginger was talking about, and I was going to get to. So this is, it's already been subdivided. They didn't clear the lot, for the subdivision, putting in the infrastructure, the roads, the stormwater retention. So here's a tree survey, and all those trees that you see in the dotted line in the center of that parcel they don't have to replace those trees. That's in the buildable area.
Yes.
So they can clear all those trees. And what we have marked on, in the zoning setback area, which Ginger will show you the arrow, cut down to the front. So these are the trees that they removed that they have to replace. There's a calculation up here at the top that we did in practice. These are the trees and the DBHs, and the cross-sectional square inches of tree replacement that they have to replace based on this example. That one 18-inch pine tree in that buildable area accounts for almost all of their cross-sections that they have to replace. And that's the difference between waiting to clear the lots individually under individual tree permits and stripping everything.
Bill, did you have a comment?
Yes, on the previous example, so then they will come in and they'll get a permit, a building permit for each individual lot and go through the tree calculations and then fill the lot each time, right? Instead of a mass grading.
No, this is mass graded. This is mass graded and the next one is not. The next one is a wooded lot. This is mass grading and the next one is individual tree removal permit. So what they're going to have on this is they're going to have to meet their minimum standards on each one of those lots. And that's going to go, also counts towards their tree replacement, which would be, I think most of these lots in here.
But if they hadn't done that, then if they had applied the next example, then each lot, they would come in with a building permit and do the survey on each individual lot and then calculate them.
Yeah, or a standalone tree removal permit. Doesn't have to be a building permit, it's a standalone.
Jessica?
For the second approach, the individual lot development, does that have to be an individual owner? Or can a developer sell 30 lots to a builder, if the builder puts in 30 building permit applications,
Yep.
and all approved and mobilizes the same?
Yes, it can be a builder, it could be the developer, it could be the homeowner. You can just do it under individual lots.
Melissa?
I thought I understood, but I think now I'm confused again. So, first subdivision example, all the cross-hatching, that one. What we said here was, I'm asking, so correct me. What we said here was the builder could clear more than 20% all at once because they are leaving a greater than required vegetated area with trees on it.
No, they can only clear more than 20% because they got a waiver from the ERC. That's a separate issue from tree removal, tree replacement. So you get that waiver in whatever, in this particular instance, they were allowed to clear phases 1 and 2, which is more than 20% of the overall lots, but they had to build out phases 1 and 2 before they could clear phase 3.
Phase 3, okay.
So one of the reasons for the 20% lot variance is you don't want, someone come in with a subdivision and clear 10,000 lots and the economy crash. In 20 years, you've got just vacant lots sitting everywhere.
Which is something I've seen, which is why I'm asking this question.
Yeah, we have seen that, but if they ask for the waiver, they can prove they have that hardship, and the DRC votes that way, then that's the way it goes.
So in these two subdivision examples, it's not the same. Going back to my comment at the very beginning about clustering density in order to cluster trees, it's not the same from an ecological services standpoint to have little individual lots, each one with a tree in the middle as if it was the picture over the sofa, versus leaving some trees as a need.
Well, these are fairly large blocks of trees. You see at the top and in the middle, and then all the houses are clustered together in each.
No, in the second example, she's saying.
Oh, in the second example?
That does not encourage clustering.
Yeah.
Oh, clustering the house.
Okay, so that is an individual lot.
This is an individual lot, one lot.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, we would want all the lots that are next to this to do something similar to where they leave a back portion of the lot uncleared. So you have strips, and that's our intention. It doesn't always work out that way because, you know, if they want to leave a side instead of a rear for whatever reason, we can't really force them. You know, it's like, hey, which ones do you want to save? Here's what your bill would be. If you didn't say anything, they would have had to replace 250 something inches at $56, and you know that's a lot of money. So the incentive is, hey, if you don't save enough trees, you're going to have to pay a substantial amount into the tree fund or replant. So those really work. You know, the monetary value of the cross-sectional square inches keep people from clearing more trees, as you can see.
Bill, no, Bob.
So this one had more trees preserved because they got the right to clear more versus the other way.
Bob?
Yeah, this comment is not on the subdivision level, it's on the single lot level. So that homeowner comes in, and what Keith just explained is exactly right. However, if that perimeter, the setback on the left and right side of this lot, happened to have a whole score of trees that needed to go because there's only 6 feet or 8 feet between the house and the property line and the next house, they could not have met that, and it's a random, totally random application of the rules. Had there been a whole score of trees on the outside of that building envelope, this person may have had to pay $5,000 or $10,000 to the tree mitigation fund because all he had was a pine tree or two that he could save within the buildable envelope.
Well, they also have the option of clearing clearing the entire lot and only replanting one tree for every 1,000 square foot of lot space. So there are multiple ways to attack this. So if it's going to be more advantageous for the developer or homeowner to plant, let's say this lot's a 10,000 square foot lot, to plant 10 or 11 trees, and then they don't have to provide replacement for those, then that's what a lot of times happens. So there are built-in avenues in here to help people out monetarily.
Okay. Help me out here because maybe I'm totally unaware of this, which is probably a good possibility. You're telling me that if I had a heavily treed lot right there, no specimens or historics, that I could come in and level every tree on that lot and plant back at one tree per 1,000 square feet and I would meet the tree code?
Yes.
Only if you're under a certain square footage.
Only if you're under 20,000 square feet.
Small lot.
Yeah. And the most lots in this county are in R4 zoning, and that's 7,500 square feet.
Where is that code?
It's in the residential section of the tree code.
We'll get there. Maybe we'll get there today.
If we get there today, I'll show you.
That's great. I did my work. I learned something new today.
Well, good. Yeah. So a question from me is, if doing it, the clearing initially, the first example, where you could have clear a certain section at certain percentages at a time, results in more trees, why would you create an avenue for people to want to do the lot by lot? Is that the intention? You want people to do the lot by lot, or you don't have a preference?
Well, I mean, as county forester, it's not up to me to really decide what's best for you in your development. You bring it to me, I look at it, and I apply the code to it. If it fits within the code,
well, if we're trying to incentivize more trees, if that's the goal, then we do want that first example, right?
It's a double-edged sword. I mean, if you end up clearing, not clearing everything, and you just put in the infrastructure, the roadways and stormwater ponds, and you clear the lots individually, then yes, people can save trees that are on the lot. If, let's say, in Bob's example, they end up with an unlucky lot, and they've got a lot of trees in their zoning setback areas, they got to clear, then they can do the one per 1,000. So yes, it allows a lot of people who are buying lots and building their own houses, their own determination what they save and how they want their lot to look.
I have a comment. I think too that, sort of what Clay said earlier is that it's hard to write a perfect code. Every site is different. So there are some sites where, because of the grade changes or because of the fall for the utilities, that, the developer needs to clear those lots in order to make those, those utility connections or whatever. And in that case, there is a mechanism for that, but what that typically will result in is a larger tree preservation area. So there's a trade-off. On some subdivisions, it makes a lot of sense to just clear the infrastructure and do it lot by lot, right? So it's really about the site, and then it's about the preference of the developer more than our preference, and I think there's room for both. Like, I think that we can't say, oh, there's never a good reason to clear a lot of lots, because sometimes that's really the only way they can do it because of elevation in particular. Like, they have to bring in a lot of fill. And in that case, then you're going to plant back the minimum standards on each lot, the 1 per 2,500 square feet. So you don't have this desert area where the lots are. You still get, yard trees and stuff like that for sustainability and heat island and those reasons. But maybe you have a larger chunk. So we think that there are some ways to be creative and flexible within the code that we have. And we just can't know everybody's situation.
Sure, it's to allow that customization based on the site parameters. Tyler?
Just wanted to kind of share like a little background, because I've designed subdivisions for both of these ways, and it's been completely dependent on what the land allows me to do. But what Jennifer's saying is very, very correct. In a subdivision like this, we have to drain the lots towards the road. In order for that preserved area, especially if it's a wetland, to not be considered to be negatively impacted by our development, by the runoff from our stormwater, we have to bring it into our drainage system. So when this subdivision gets built, what's on the screen as an example, it's unlikely that the engineer found a perfect channel to put the road in, that all the lots graded at 1 to 2% towards the center, and they could go build their drainage system in the footprint of that road and leave the lots uncleared. We could also install drainage infrastructure at the rear of the lots to try to collect that, but that requires us putting a pipe in the ground. We dig a trench, we start affecting root zones. We can't save any of the trees at that point. So there comes a situation that no matter what the goal of the development team and the engineering team is at the beginning of the project, you have to work with what the site gives you. Now, there are things that we could change within the rules that may not be things that we want to change, but they could affect how we go about grading these lots. For example, I'd love to grade some of those lots to drain towards the rear, make it to where we don't have to clear them up front, and have a swale somewhere near the property line that I can capture that water and bring it to my pond, and I commingle all my natural and stormwater areas. But there are layers of code in every agency that I deal with that says that's not allowed. So a lot of the things that Keith and Ginger are trying to come up with a set of rules to help regulate, like, mass clearing, so we don't have 20 years of lots sitting vacant because somebody went bankrupt. There's the catch-22 that we could never build a development like this without putting all the infrastructure in first, because in order to build the first house, you have to have the final inspection done, or at least a partial final inspection done on your stormwater system, on your roads, on your water that's feeding in for fire protection, on your sewer, on all of those other things. And in order to get that, we have to build enough of it. We can't just build for one house and then build for the next house and build for the next house. We build enough to justify mobilizing the construction crew out there that does that. And so there's a lot of difficulties here. And when I look at these two examples, one of my favorite subdivisions I designed over in New Smyrna, it's 1-acre lots. We just cleared the roads, we just cleared the ponds, dug the ponds. And they went in and they cleared the lots as they built. They're $1 million houses. I mean, they're starting at $1 million. There's not very many people that are shopping for a house in the average market that can go buy in that subdivision. I've also designed a subdivision that I would never want to live in, but it's a $350,000 house. And, that's maybe what I could afford. And so that might be where I have to live for a period of time. And that's, I think that's part of the catch-22, though, is we do have to remember some of these decisions aren't just being made because a developer finds it to be easier, it's because they have a set of requirements that they have to meet, and it's the only economically viable way that they can get there. Otherwise, it just doesn't develop, and we don't have the houses on the market, and that is an option.
Okay. Wendy?
Sorry.
That's right, yeah.
I wanted to jump on the thing you said at the beginning of your comments, Tyler, about, you could have a swale, you could have a tree preservation area at the back of the lot, have the lot drained to the back. Isn't part of, like, if you go back to the whole purpose at the very beginning of the ordinance, that trees actually reduce flooding, they take up water, they slow down the movement of water. Like, don't we actually want trees at the back of the lots to catch that water and do that service? And so when you say you have all these layers of regulations, this is what we're doing here, is we're looking at the layers of regulations. I know we can't impact the St. John's River Water District, and we can continue to put pressure on them to get up to speed, but I didn't take time to pile on at the remarks at the beginning of the meeting, when Bob and Tyler and Bill were all talking about stepping back and looking at the bigger picture here, but I would say, I'll just put the low impact development topic on the table, which we agreed at the last meeting we would delay until the county has done some of its work with the University of Florida on that. But low impact development principles would say you leave the trees at the back of the lot, you drain the water to where the trees are, you let the trees do the work, and if you need an overflow from that area, you grade the rest of the site so that the water can run off of that area into a dry basin or something else, and create the treatment train. And so I just think that hiding behind the regulations is not useful when our point here is to actually change the regulations. And so, yeah, again, looking at the examples that we're playing with right here, I would look at these and say, why didn't we keep this strip of trees, in the east-west axis here, in between those lots? That would have been the best thing to do. And I have one more point, and then I'll stop, which is, I think it was your remark earlier, I can't remember which one of you said it, countywide, we would have urban zones and we would have natural zones. And granted, we would never have exactly that because we do thankfully have lots of trees that have been planted in our urban zones over the last several decades that are now mature, and that's lovely. We celebrate those and sell those properties for more money. But from an ecological perspective, what we also know is that we need areas with large matrix of natural habitat, and then we need corridors and patches of natural habitat throughout our built environment. And to just think about urban areas as a place where no nature happens, and I know that's not what you said, but it could be perceived that way, that's not what we want. We want our urban zones to be friendly to nature, to have our backyard pollinator areas, to have our wildlife, to have birds out and about. We want that. And so how do we create the corridors and patches for these trees to coexist in our urban built environment, and to stay contiguous with our natural areas that we're preserving through the kinds of incentives that Bob mentioned at the beginning. So that's all I want to add.
Okay. Bob, I saw you put your card down.
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to make, so, for those that don't understand the layers of regulation that the engineers work under, that whole site that you're looking at up there has to contain a 100-year rainfall. Not one drop of water can leave that site from calculated 100-year rain event. So that's where the problem comes in, of a backyard being saved when the grade is in the wrong direction. And that's just one of multiple
so
regulations.
This gets
That's
into
the big is it has to contain all the water.
DEP permits wetland impacts and Volusia County permits wetland impacts. So the conflict between discharging our quote-unquote fertilized, dirty yard stormwater into a wetland area in not having it pre-treated by a stormwater pond, which is what frequently prevents us from being able to take advantage of these types of opportunities. We can fix that at the county level, but we can't fix that at the state level. So the committee that we're on, there are layers of regulation that we have control over, and I want to bring them to our attention and help the team to understand what they are and why we run into these issues. But there are layers that are outside of our control, and that within reason, we need to pretend will forever be outside of our control so that our committee can accomplish something. My reason in bringing it up, though, is the tighter the density of a subdivision becomes, the more units you put per acre, the smaller the lot footprint is, the less flexibility you have to adjust the footprint of your clustered lots around features of the site. And so when we get to lower density developments, we can save trees on the lots, we can leave the character dispersed throughout, we can move our infrastructure within. It's possible, that's the $1 million houses. When we get to the cheaper houses, when we get to the smaller lots, there's going to be a certain level of clear cut that in order to meet all of our stormwater and other state regulations, we can't always avoid. You know, I have a site right now that the existing ground is 72, the flood stage is 71. My finished floor is going to be 75. I'm going to have 4 feet of fill on it so that I can make my stormwater and my 100-year storm and everything else work. And that's fine. It's a commercial site. It will function perfectly fine. But that's, do I want to stay at grade? Yes. Do I want to have 20 feet of slope around all edges of my development or a wall? No. Am I going to affect root zones as a result of that? Yes. Are those trees going to be dead because I'm filling above a root zone? And by the code, it says that even though the Mississippi State guide that Melissa sent us said that trees can survive up to 4 feet of sandy soil on a large part of the root zone as long as it doesn't touch the trunk area, it's considered dead, so I bulldoze the tree so that there's not a liability for that owner later with the county. And so we deal with the replacement up front. As an engineer, I'm making a decision for that property owner. I'm not an arborist. I'm not, in position to argue all these other things. I'm just telling you why I make those decisions.
Okay, Ginger?
So I have a couple of comments. One is, Tyler, I think, pointed out really well that it's complicated, right? It's easy to say, oh, we're going to talk about the tree ordinance and we're going to talk about it for 2 meetings and we're going to be done. It's complicated. And no site every site is different. And so, the code isn't, the way the code is written, and granted it needs tweaking, but, the framers at that time tried to think about multiple avenues to get development approved and protect natural habitat. And so, to Wendy's point about, we don't want our urban areas to be nature free. That's why in the code it says you have to set aside 15% of the land area to preserve existing trees. So there are those pockets. To the extent that we have control over it, we try to make those pockets on adjacent properties back up to one another. So you create this system of a corridor over time. We can't demand that of the property owner. And we have the provision of a minimum amount of trees on every lot so that you don't end up with all the trees 3/4 of a mile down the road and all the houses with no nature whatsoever, right? So the code really is kind of written in a way to try to meet the multiple benefits of trees. The cluster trees have benefits, the single trees have benefits, and in a lot of ways there are alternatives. And that's why there are a lot of things in this code that says it's up to the county forester. Because if it's not up to the county forester, it's a rule. This is the rule. And if you don't meet the rule, then you have to appeal and appeal and appeal. And that costs time and that costs money. And so intentionally, the county forester has some leeway to make exceptions based on site conditions. And I think that's something that's valuable. Now, we're talking about the code that we implement in Volusia County unincorporated areas only, right? We're not talking about what the cities are doing necessarily. I think once we figure out what you want to recommend for the unincorporated area, we need to swing back to Chapter 50 and say, okay, what of these things do you think we should be implementing in cities? It's clearly not going to happen today, but I think this has been a really good discussion about all of how the parts work together and how it's complicated, and that we're probably not going to get the perfect code, but Right, yeah, or a consensus, probably. But when we're looking at all these bits, we're only on page 2, but we've had great conversations about it. When we're looking at the bits, keep in mind that there's sort of that larger picture of preserving chunks and preserving individual trees. And maybe we can, get some consensus.
Weren't the conservation subdivision idea, that idea was to try to be sort of more all-encompassing to address many of these aspects in one big?
Yeah, so we have 2 ways right now in the code that you can cluster residential units in a subdivision. One is our cluster subdivision requirements, and that really is just about putting all your density in one area and saving sort of some other areas on the lot. The conservation subdivision provisions are a little bit different. One thing is it only applies to land within ECO, the environmental core overlay, or immediately adjacent to ECO. So that's not, the urban areas of the county. But basically what that says is if you preserve a certain amount of open space and you preserve all or nearly all of the wetlands on site, you can get a density bonus. And so then the intent is then those lots are clustered and you preserve, those open space areas. We haven't had a conservation subdivision. Is there still one going through, 2 going through?
We plan them all the time, they never finish them.
Well, Jessica has held up 2 fingers, so.
I think 2 are close to being done. It's talked about a lot, but nobody's gone through the process.
Well, it's only in ECO or immediately adjacent to ECO, so that limits the geographic scope.
What about the clustering subdivision? Is that different than the conservation subdivision?
Yes, yeah. I think the cluster sub, all it does is reduce the minimum, or the lot size requirements. It doesn't provide density bonus. But it gives you flexibility on how you arrange your lot. So you don't have to meet the minimum lot size, like in R4, you can't have a lot smaller than, I don't know the number, but there you go. But in a cluster subdivision, you can have a different lot size, so you can be more creative.
I almost started this meeting asking, are we getting too far into the minutia? I'm trying to remember our goal here, is how to ensure that balance between the environment and human population. So I think you guys bring up good points, and we can carry on, of course, because I'm not really sure how else to address this, but so we'll carry on. But do know at any point if we feel like we're missing the mark, like Ginger said, do voice some other options to try to still reach our goal, addressing the environment. But making the best use of everyone's time, So
if we're carrying on, we are still on page 2 of the comments. On Bob's comment about trees that were maybe in a fernery or whatever. Did we
be positive? It's page 3.
Page 3 of the code, yeah. So I don't know that we made a decision about that. Like, was my explanation sufficient about if it's a deteriorated tree, it would be exempt? I don't know if you were comfortable with that.
No, I think, my personal opinion is those trees should be exempted. They were planted for agricultural purposes. It's strictly a monoculture. They shouldn't, at the very least, they shouldn't be allowed to become specimen trees.
trees that were for sale, right?
No,
That's what we're
no,
talking about.
no,
We're talking about any tree.
No, I'm talking about trees that were planted for shade in ferneries or in nurseries.
So if there's a tree that's a historic live oak that was planted in a nursery, it shouldn't be protected because it was planted.
I'm not talking about historics.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about historics.
What about,
I'm not talking about historic trees. You know that I'm talking about laurel oaks that are considered specimens because there are many ordinances, including the land, that consider laurel oaks over 20 inches a nuisance. because of the risks that laurel oaks pose. Typically, that's the tree that's used in nurseries because it grows so fast and provides a shade canopy very quickly. But it's also a tree that only lives 60 to 70 years. And so when it's 50 years old, I present to the committee, is it more beneficial to save that tree that's going to die within the next 10 to 20 years, or to plant a tree that might live for 100? That's all I keep coming back to. I'm not trying to strip the earth of trees.
Well,
It's not my point.
Here's a list of trees that we put together with the average sizes, rates and heights and lifespan. That's what you guys can kind of ask for before. If you look on there, there are a lot of trees that, are not going to last more than 100 years, 80 to 100 years. So if we get into, this tree only lasts, around 100 years, they should be protected, we're going to have a monoculture of live oaks, sand live oaks, ball, cypress, and a couple other species.
So here, I didn't follow you there.
Here's the average lifespan.
Average lifespan at the top.
The fourth column.
So, and there's two types of laurel oaks that people don't realize that there's two species, laurifolia and hemispirica, and the laurifolia is particularly the one that gives everybody, the other species a bad name. And again, everything is conditioned when you come out here. It's in bad condition. You're not required to replace it. I've seen laurel oaks that are well over 80 years, probably 200 years old, that are fine. The code's about condition. So if the laurel is perfectly healthy, and it's 150 years old, it could live another 100 years. I mean, these are just averages.
But to your point, typically the laurel oaks in a fernery aren't in good shape, right? Because they've been fertilized, they've been watered. I mean, we go out to these sites and you walk the site and you can tell that tree is not in good shape. And we exempt those trees. Like we don't have any incentive or desire to protect a tree that will become a hazard to the future homeowner. So if there's a question about whether that tree is a healthy tree or meets the definition of deteriorated, I mean, we don't want to have folks save bad trees. Oh, well, and Tyler, right? If there's a question where we say, that one needs to go.
I tend to think that the laurel oaks and the water oaks should come off the specimen tree list because it's encouraging the saving of bad trees.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I mean, you say bad trees, but live oaks and laurel oaks, they have acorns, right? And wildlife depends on the acorns. And the trees have what they call mash years, where they produce more acorns one year or not. They're usually alternating. And the wildlife usually depends on these. So what's a bad tree? It's a life-saving tree to native species.
I'm gonna go to Jack and then Bill on the list. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I didn't understand the original, what Bob originally said about the trees and the ferneries, but, and one of your points was that it's standalone, and I don't think that's a problem. I think being standalone is fine. We prefer them clustered, but a standalone is okay. To me, it's kind of like trees are trees. We're trying to preserve trees. If the tree's damaged or if the tree is a nuisance or a risk, then it can be assessed that way and it'd be taken out. Otherwise, I think the tree should stay. And just because a tree is not a great tree, maybe a water oak may fall or maybe a problem, but it's not a nuisance at the time. It's being assessed as being all right. I think we're dealing with a lot of details here that have been addressed, and I think we should stick with it. Now, let me add one more thing. I'm worried about this group and getting anything done, because what's really happening is we're voicing our opinions on a lot of good things. It's terrific stuff, but to actually get down to this and get into the details and decide what we think we should recommend to the county council, we're talking years if this is any kind of pace, right? And so I don't know, I don't know if this is I'm not sure how we do it differently, but as a format, this is really getting stretched. And I think it's all reasonable that we get into the details, but we're dealing with what was considered the low-hanging fruit. If you remember right, that's when we chose to deal with this first, because it was the easier one. And So I'm not sure where we're going as a group. I think it's all really constructive. But to get down to the brass tacks of what we think we should recommend is, I mean, we're not getting there. We're not throwing it back.
Sure.
So,
Well, I have the same sentiment, Jack. I have some ideas on that. Oh, was Ginger going to say
Yeah, I was
something?
just gonna say that, maybe what would be helpful as we go through these things is you ask us and we tell you, how often does this thing happen? Right, like, how often do we come across a site where it's a fernery and we've got a tree problem, right? Like, do we spend an hour talking about something that happens 1% of the time? I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. The things that are more common or might be more impactful, maybe we spend more time on. The things that happen rarely, like the rebuttal presumption happens rarely, maybe we don't spend as much time on, or we can help maybe put some scale to things.
Sure, and that's helpful. And I'm going to go to Bliss before I make a comment.
I was just gonna, I share a lot of the sentiments of everything that was just being said without getting down into the minutia. However, when you start talking about restricting people's rights and then giving rights, I mean, you're going into the minutia regardless. So it's, if we take a bigger picture, like the meeting started off with coming up with incentives and proactive statements, but then when you get, which I'm all in favor of, but then when you get into limiting people's rights, then that's when everybody gets really defensive and gets into the weeds.
Yeah, agreed. So my thought, Jack, because you're right, realistically, if we go at this pace and this is the low-hanging fruit, you hope, and let me also mention, we have essentially a new council, so whoever appointed you may not even be there anymore. I encourage you to reach out to your new person and get their understanding of, this committee, because it was a priority for the last council. Will it continue to be a priority for this new council? So that's a to-do. I was going to mention that before everyone left. I hope everyone will do that. A thought is we take on the bigger issues, right? We look more broadly at, what is the goal of this committee? It was the public was upset about all the growth that was happening. So, and then they worried about water and they were worried about traffic. Now, the reason that first meeting I was like rushing us through is we aren't going to become experts at trees. We all have our different specialties. We should comment on some general, almost like a council policy ideas, and then we have to just trust staff to write the implementing ordinance. If 14 of us try to write an implementing ordinance,
Wait to page 2 in an hour.
yeah, I mean, we could and we could debate it out, but I just wonder because again, the question becomes the scale. The issue with trees was that people saw clear cutting. The issue isn't necessarily with this ordinance, right? I mean, there are some things that can be updated and we're finding little administrative stuff and we are debating the duration of years. But the big issue was clear cutting. How do you address the clear cutting? And you've said it, the DRC is granting waivers. So should we then just maybe write a letter to the DRC to encourage them not to grant those waivers? I mean, or get the data why they're doing that? Jessica, go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'll on that. In a broad sense, in that, sure, there is, discussion of clear cutting, but what we saw today, based on the two plans, where one is clear cut, one is not, is one pushes more trees. So even that fundamental issue that residents may have voice and concerned citizens may have voice is more complicated than it seems. So if the DRC said we're going to not grant those waivers anymore, developers, again, depending on bill and things like that, will say, and we won't do law by law, we'll do the other approach, or we won't save as many trees. So it's not, I think the only thing we can do is review the standards we have in front of us and how the laws will change and how they impact their cutting. My concern is that we have a lot of things where we've already hit on topics where it's a yes, no, provide staff direction, we can save everything on it. We need to make decisions.
Sure. You bring up a good point, and when I did think this through, it's also an education for the residents to share with them the environmental benefits of clear cutting. And that's where I thought our group maybe could come together, Well, I mean, we have to shift the narrative, we have to shift the perception. If it is a benefit to clear cut in that manner and save and preserve more trees, we should be the group that should be saying that. You know, I've actually thought, you know, we pen a letter, you know, and we put out this good data that we are learning. You know, we ask good questions and then we're coming up with interesting insights. You know, I didn't know that, doing that with, and we have all these different perspectives to rebut if you don't believe that to be true, right? So that's just a thought on my part. You know, what a group could be doing is affecting, you know, and communicating to the public benefits and then changing the things that are not beneficial to the environment. Listen to Jessica.
Real quick, I was just going to say that a lot of the cities are already ahead of us on this, and they do it when people come to them and they want to get around all this, and they're doing RPUDs, and they are bringing in the people at the city council meetings to educate the council on these very things and the benefits of clear cutting versus the others. And so the cities are ahead of us in a lot of areas.
Jessica?
I was just going to say, I love a good letter, but I think that the task you've been assigned as this committee is to review the regulations, not community outreach is part of it, and I think we talked about the bigger scope there, but I just don't want to lose sight of what we've been asked to do by council with what many of us will also do in our other roles after we leave here and walk.
Bernie?
I just think we could follow kind of staff's lead. They're the ones that deal with this day in, day out. They know what issues we need to focus on. So maybe rather than looking at the entire ordinance and trying to change everything, let's maybe follow their recommendations on what should be looked at. And then we can decide as a group, do we want to follow exactly what they say, or do we want to align a little bit and change their recommendation?
That's reasonable, Bob.
Yeah, excuse me. The public reaction to clear cutting obviously is without us all here, unfortunately. And, you know, Keith, I just want you to know that your predecessor many years ago, Joe Allen, was hung out to dry over some decisions that he made that were sound decisions as far as the, you know, preservation of trees were concerned. It involved clear cutting, it involved saving, you know, areas that were, you know, viable, natural set-asides. And I found myself, along with our association, in front of council defending the forester, the county forester, because this was the right decision. So, you know, Jessica, to your point, I don't know, you know, a letter might be a good thing because there is a misconception when the public drives by a site and all they see is that 50 acres is now doesn't have any trees on it. And they don't understand that there's 40 acres that's been set aside and that 1,000 trees will be replanted. So,
Jen?
Yeah, the whole clear cutting concept, I think, is kind of emotionally charged and probably not great, but that's not why we're here, really. I mean, that's more the premise, one thing we've seen. Really, we're here because of the impact of all the development within the county relative to what its effect is on the environment. I mean, that's really what we're here. It's bigger than clear cutting, in my opinion. And I think really Bernie's got the right idea as far as getting this thing down to something we can get done. And it may just be to really put the burden on the staff and say to them, okay, if we think we can make our standards higher or better, then let's look at those standards. Let's hear the suggestions, and then let's keep the debate to just that, right? Just that. And then we say, does that work? If that doesn't work, we say, okay, you know, we don't like the change, or whatever it may be. But I think that's the only way to get our arms around this and get down to making some sort of harder decisions. I think that's burdensome to you all, especially in that this first one has been kind of hard, and the other ones will be harder. But I think that's the best way to approach it.
Melissa?
I think today's cumbersome meeting has been very valuable because we've heard from people that come from different disciplines. So I think that was really important, especially enlightening with Tyler's last talk. Going forward, that's going to pay a dividend for us, I think, and tell us who to ask a question of. I agree that our remit is to go through this ordinance and make recommendations to the council, case closed, and I agree that staff has the expertise on that. But as for the public in general, we are here as political appointees. That's why we are not the Green Ribbon Panel, that's why we are ENRAC. And it was the then council that is responding to public human pride. I don't think it's our job to educate them, as Jessica said, she's well aware of different activities that we're involved in. So what I have done instead is encourage people to read the minutes of these meetings, to watch these meetings online, to follow them. I'm a cynic, and I don't think that most people have the appetite to get to read through this slog, which all of us volunteered to happily do and gladly do for our fellow citizens. So that's my last 2 cents.
All right. Well, I think everyone then would be agreeable to what Bernie and Jack have said. Hopefully Ginger and Keith, you'd be comfortable with that. You already have made some suggested changes, so now we just need to debate those pieces. It's 3:42. We may close early, adjourn early, because I really think it's important that we get the will of this new council. We say, oh, our role is to do this. It was that. I'm very curious, and I did talk to Jake Johansson, who is the at-large. Our focus may shift. The other thing is, when I read the resolution, it looked like it was just sort of, I know thought went into it, but just because that's what it says, we are going through it. It doesn't make sense for us to do what we're doing, I think, but maybe. That was very strong, but it may not be what is, to go through line by line. But again, let's try it Bernie and Jack's way on the next go round, give you time to put together what you want. Jessica?
I thought we were doing Bernie and Jack's way. That's why I'm just like,
Yeah.
we got staff recommendations, we provided comments, we have key issues that we need to give them direction on, so they can give us a draft ordinance back, so we can improve, and we're just not there. So how is it changing, is my question? What is the process?
We went through and pointed out all the things we felt comfortable with. We wanted to talk about that staff didn't ask a question on. They didn't ask us to input on dozens of these, pages of these. So I think that's where, and again, I see the point of also getting that outside perspective. People in the field pointing out some flaws in the ordinance is helpful too. So, Bill?
Yeah, we not only looked at the recommended changes that they had highlighted and with questions, but we also needed to look at the strikeouts and additions. So we were looking at their proposed changes.
Sure.
Not just the little ones that they're calling out.
Sure, that's true. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So I think one way we might have gotten a little off track is, originally we had intended to go through the tree ordinance and explain it to the group before you made your recommendations, right? Because I feel like a lot of the comments were, we didn't understand, right? It's complicated, and that's a lot of why we're trying to make some changes, because it's complicated. We might have done better if we hadn't asked everybody to make comments before we had the presentation. Because you would have understood the thing about there's a subdivision set of rules and there's a single family set of rules, right? And so, we can't go back and undo that, but moving forward, I think we can do a better job of doing the education and then asking for the comments. And we can still do that. We talked about, should we just go through the presentation of what does the tree ordinance say now? And what does each of these changes mean? That's one thing. If you want to know what the big questions are, in our mind, the big questions are, do we have graduated tree protections in Norma and Eco? Right? Are there places in the county where we should increase tree protection? I think that the inverse of that question is the tree protection that's in the existing ordinance too much in the urban areas. Now, you won't hear Keith and I say that that's true, but that's why we have lots of perspectives in the room, right? So the 15% tree preservation area, the right number, and should it be the same everywhere in the county? That's the big question. The exemptions, I think, are a big question. Should we add some of the exemptions we proposed to add? And we got some various feedback on that. And the rest of it, the historic tree and specimen tree lists, right? Those are sort of the bigger policy questions. The rest of it really is, things that we've learned from having to, I was the county forester for a long time before Keith was the county, like we've learned these things over the number of years we've been here. Those are more administrative, changing the sections around, that kind of stuff. So, if we wanted to do more big picture, I would say, are we protecting the things we're supposed to protect? Should there be graduated protections in other areas? What should be a historic tree and where should those rules apply? And what should be a specimen tree? Did I miss anything?
What habitat are you trying to protect? So,
Right. Are we going to focus on existing trees or are we going to focus on replanting?
If you're looking at your habitat types, and some of you have said things about protecting scrub and longleaf pine habitat. Well, Norma is mainly wetlands. So, I mean, in the code, it says it's supposed to protect critical upland habitat, but we really have never modified those maps. So, I mean, do we need directions? That would probably need direction to modify the Norma maps to include these areas. It's an eagle's nest, scrub jay habitat, longleaf pine habitat, those types of things. And then, like you said, do they have a 20% tree preservation area in these areas, or 25%? So those are things that.
And I like the idea of, are we looking at it from the completely wrong perspective, right? I think that is a super valuable conversation. Is there a different way to get what we want?
Yeah, I still want to have that little subcommittee. I still would like to see that if it's legal.
I have a question for Keith or Bill. I know there's wetland grading standards. Are there nationally accepted forestry grading standards that deal with like the value of an existing stand of trees and natural?
Well, I mean, it's about basal area and, board feet. We have to.
Not about habitat.
Board feet.
So we don't have a good way of measuring the ecological value of a forest in a comparative way to the scientific rate.
I'm sure we can find some sort of study from somewhere.
Okay, so, go ahead, Bill.
So, on that issue about habitat, so we need to, if there's a different place where we should be talking about habitat besides the tree ordinance, we should do that, because trying to tie in a different issue into the tree ordinance is complicated. Kind of like recharge. You were talking about recharge. Longleaf pine grows in recharge areas. We should protect the longleaf pine so that we can get to the recharge.
Right, I just wanted to bring up that, if what you said, Norma, if we have increased protections in Norma, that people may hear that Norma natural resource management area and they go, oh, great, we can protect all of these other types of habitats, and that's not true. So I just want to make sure that everybody was aware of what that is, what that designation is.
Okay, so handful of people have said, no, we need to be getting into the word by word, and then a couple of people are saying, maybe just rely on staff to direct, though then it was argued that we are doing that. But let's put it out as line by line for which interests are proposed. We look at these four big policy kind of questions, have that education and debate. That's really which direction are we going? I think is really what we need to decide before the next meeting. So we're not.
Or do you want us to do the presentation? Like, here's what it does, maybe that'll change the comments. Maybe it's too late for that.
No, I don't think it's too
only
late.
on page 3.
I think an outline could help. I mean, maybe not a full presentation, but this is the replacement criteria. These are the protection standards. These are the replacement criteria. These are the exemptions. And just not in great detail going through every line of it, but this is what's in place in the code that you guys read. If you have questions about what you read, that type of thing. Because I think that could have clarified more quickly some of our problems. And you guys going through a presentation already sidetracked. We've already tried that once unsuccessfully a couple months ago, if I remember. So,
I apologize.
I don't want to be the negative Nancy on that, but I think that it's putting a lot of burden on you guys to put something together that may not actually get us to all stay on topic.
Jack and then Melissa.
Yeah, I think it goes too far too, but I think it needs to be, so when you say presentation, you our eyes gloss over, and we think in terms of the details, I think we get into it, but I guess I'm thinking in terms of the bigger question, I guess, but down to, we want to do these things. You think they're a good idea, that we want to do these things? Do we want to extend the time, on developing property from ag? Okay, well, let's stay on that and get that done and say, okay, what's the years that we all vote? And that's one thing we get done. And so when I say it, I think it's basically isolating the questions and then addressing them versus allowing the conversation to get so wide, even though the information is valuable. That's the way I look at it. Even if we lose some of the discussion and maybe we don't get into what's valuable discussion, at least we're moving forward to making judgments and then making our opinions known. That's the way I look at it.
Okay, Melissa?
So Ginger, you outlined the things that were the big questions that you guys have, and that's also what's in the document. So to the point of getting it a little shorter, not a long presentation, I think it's what Tyler said, just focusing on those questions. These are the pieces that support it. These are the decisions we need. Not all of us focus because we need help focusing.
Well, and I would agree with Jessica. I mean, we have been going comment by comment pretty well. At the very end, we got a little sidetracked, but I thought it was, good philosophical debate. But I mean, we have been doing work. We have been making some decisions. The hardship is to do one ordinance, we have to go through the whole thing. So even if we come up with a duration of years, we have to wait to do all the other amendments in order to have one ordinance. So how about we do it, John? And then we'll...
Just the way I would summarize what would be efficient is that you come to us, tell us why you want to change this, why you want to keep it, give us some background on that, and educate us as a committee. Let us give you the feedback and comment, and let us as a committee decide whether these changes need to happen or not.
Right, which I think is the four articulated
Right.
big pieces. That's what I'm in favor of looking at.
Yeah.
And you can prepare a little bit of information that you feel is necessary for us to make an informed decision. But what we don't want you to do is, expend too much time and energy, on something that, well, that all, I won't rush you again. So, but is everyone in favor of that? Those four articulated, Jessica, go ahead.
Well, I'm fine with that from a presentation standpoint, but I think if we say the role of this committee is to get staff recommendations and only decide, yes, we agree or no, we don't agree, we're shortcutting the purpose of this committee. We all have perspectives that, why we were appointed to review the entire provisions and to look and say, staff can at any time, at their own discretion, reform the ordinance. We were put together to say, we think there may be more that we can do, or we think that this might change the attitude for the day. So I'm fine with that from a presentation standpoint, but I think we should all be doing the work and reading through and saying, these are issues that we have concern. How we vote on that and move forward from that is fine, but I don't want to cut that part out.
Yeah, can I respond to that real quick? I agree, right? We know what we think needs to be changed, but we have a perspective. And so it would be much easier, much quicker if you just said, oh, hey, they want to do this, do we like that? No, we don't like it, yes, we like it, whatever. It would go quicker. But then we would miss out on some of the other things, like, hey, look at it from a completely different way. I'm not likely to be the one looking at it from a completely different way because I'm kind of entrenched in the way that we've been doing it, right? So I appreciate that other perspective, and that's the value of a group like this. I think this meeting was just difficult because we are having growing pains. I don't necessarily think that, I think we got ahead of ourselves with these comments. I think it'd been easier if we had been able to explain what it does now, and then you have a better insight when you make the comments. I think at this point, we are where we are. I still think we should, at some point, go through these comments. The other alternative is that I could take these comments and we could respond to each of them with sort of our perspective. That would take a little time, but then that would at least, I don't know, maybe inform the next discussion. But I don't I don't want it to just be, oh, well, Keith wants this, yes or no, we want this, yes or no, because then I think we'll miss some really cool ideas.
Okay. Interesting.
I'd like to add to that, yeah, I think we should still go through. We didn't have a huge presentation. We were just gonna flow through the changes that we had to make and say, hey, this is why we're doing this. This is what this means. You guys don't, you don't deep dive in, and you've been working with the ordinance how long, and you didn't know that there was that position in there. So, I mean, you're probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the room, and there are things in here you don't know. So, I mean, going through this.
Why I have such empathy for the guy coming off the street.
Yeah.
Right. So, going through this and laying out what we want to change, what's in here, and then saying, hey, these are the things that we feel need to be changed. And then you guys can make a decision on it, but you can also, after that presentation, look at it and go, well, they want to add this or change this, and we want to add or change that, and then as a group, bring this all together. I mean, I don't think it's just we do this and then you guys approve it or don't.
Sure. Vernon?
Yeah, we follow the staff recommendations to start and kind of get that box checked. Okay, now what new stuff do we want to add into it in addition to what the staff has already recommended?
Okay. So, we'll talk later, January. Looking forward to it. Thank you all so much. 3 hours, a long time. Everyone, motion to adjourn.
Wait, one more thing. We don't have our next meeting set. Thursday, tomorrow is the first council meeting, and they'll set their agenda, and then we can talk about setting our next series of meetings. I'm still wanting monthly for now.
Everybody's comfortable with monthly? Okay.
And we're all excited. Unless you guys want to see each other more often.
No, I don't know.
I'm here every day. You guys want to show up?
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all very much.
Yeah.
We're adjourned.
Ginger, let me ask you this.